Hello everyone, thank you for listening to my story. If you haven't fallen asleep yet, you might as well listen to this story, and maybe you will fall asleep soon. Before listening, please like and subscribe first. Of course, the premise is that you really like my content. If you have any thoughts or feelings, please leave a message below. Your opinions will really help me grow. Okay, enough chit-chat. Let's get started. When I squatted under the third pier of the iron bridge, the rain was hitting the back of my neck along the ribs of the umbrella. 20 days. This is my 20th visit to Rose Lane. During the rainy season in Pandan City. No, now it should be called downstream of the iron bridge. The municipal government demolished the old alley 10 years ago and built a bridge across the river with a rusty iron frame. The blood shed back then has long since seeped into the mud at the bottom of the river. But corpses don't. I heard the sound of water, mixed with the muffled sound of fabric rubbing against each other. The moment the searchlight swept across the water, I saw clearly. The white and swollen ankles were stuck in the gap of the bridge pier. The trouser legs were rolled up to the knees, and the exposed skin looked like a rotten mango. A police whistle sounded in the rain. I crouched in the shadow of the bridge pier and pressed my knuckles against the wet concrete wall. The training of the Serious Crime Squad 5 years ago is still there. I count the footsteps. There are 3 people. The crisp sound of leather boots stepping on gravel. They are the patrol team. Another homeless man. This rain must have been washed down from the upper reaches of the river. As the flashlight swept over the body, I saw something pressed against his chest. The faded red cloth bag had its corners turned white from being soaked in water. 5 pieces of wood slid out of the opening, stained with dark brown blood. "Don't touch it," I blurt out. 3 beams of light came at the same time. The leading policeman squinted his eyes to recognize me, and tapped the intercom at his waist with his baton. "Sonia Lama, former member of the Serious Crime Unit. You've been suspended for half a year. And you're still hanging around." I took a half step back and rested my back against the cold bridge pier. Raindrops dripped into my eyes, through the brim of my hat, as I stared at the 5 pieces of wood, one of which had a jagged edge, as if it had been bitten off by someone's teeth.
"Non-essential people, please leave immediately." The policeman put his hand on my shoulder with such force that it hurt.
I stumbled back and forth, and out of the corner of my eye I saw the red cloth bag being put into the evidence bag. The wood chips collided with each other in the plastic bag, making a hollow sound. The chance only lasts 2 seconds. I bent over and pretended to tie my shoe, my nails digging into the edge of the splinter nearest me. The wood chip was very light, and the blood clot with the smell of rotten meat hurt the palm of my hand. "Go." The police kicked the gravel at my feet. I clenched the wood chip and stood up. The rain flowed through my fingers into my sleeves, turning the blood on the wood chip into light red. The desk lamp in the rental house is broken, and the bulb flickers. I spread the wood chip on the faded tablecloth, and the handwriting on the back made my heart skip a beat. Sonia Rama, written in pen, the ink smeared like a ball of black butterflies. The edge of the wood chip was stained with dark brown fibers. I leaned in to smell it, and it smelled like polyester and cotton, which is common in old clothes. The traces of blood splatter were slanting from the upper left to the lower right. I used a ruler to compare the angle. It should be when the holder was attacked. The wood chip stuck to the chest, and the blood spurted from above, struggling violently. I murmured. The trace identification class of the former Serious Crime Unit was running through my mind. The old superintendent always knocked on my desk and said, "Blood drops don't lie. They will tell you how the knife was swung and how the person fell." I turned on the faucet and soaked the wood chips in the warm water. Tiny bubbles of blood floated on the surface of the water, and the color on the back of the wood chips slowly faded. A vague outline emerged, with high cheekbones, a hooked nose, and a simulated portrait in the Rose Lane serial rape and murder case file in my drawer, so similar that it made my hands tremble. It was 3 in the morning, and I was staring at the old clock on the wall. With every swing of the pendulum, the outline on the wood chip became clearer. The rainy night 20 years ago suddenly flooded into my mind. When Mrs. Mara was found, she was holding half a rose in her hand, her daughter Cosette huddled in the closet, her eyes swollen like walnuts. And me, I signed a report saying that the alcoholic tramp was the murderer, even though his fingerprints did not match those on the knife handle at the scene. His son. I sat up suddenly. When the case was closed 5 years ago, the old forensic doctor said that the murderer had a 10-year-old son who was later taken away by an orphanage. The bloated corpse now has a scar on the inside of its wrist from an old cigarette burn, and the location of the scar is exactly the same as the one in the photo in the case file. The door to the morgue was climbed through the ventilation duct. I turned on the flashlight on my cell phone. The autopsy report was pressed under the stainless steel tray. The column for the identity of the deceased said John Doe, but the marks on the neck made my breathing tight. The knot was made of 3 twisted strands, exactly the same as the marks on the neck of the third victim of the Rose Lane case, Sonia. I nearly dropped my phone. Amir stood at the door of the morgue, his police uniform unbuttoned, his tie crooked at his collarbone, his eyes full of the familiar coldness. You trespassed into the evidence area while suspended. Do you want to add another charge of obstruction of duty? I stuffed my phone into my trouser pocket, my fingers unconsciously stroking the wood chips in my pocket. He took 2 steps closer, with a mixture of rain and tobacco on his body. He used to smoke this kind of mint cigarette when he stayed up all night to investigate cases. I am in charge of the Rose Lane case reopening task force. He lowered his voice. Your miscarriage of justice back then was not your fault. It was because of the backward equipment in the forensics department. But now, it's not a miscarriage of justice. I interrupted him. The homeless man was a scapegoat back then. Now his son is dead. The same method was used. Amir's jawline tightened. He reached out to touch my pocket, and I took a half step back, the sharp corner of the wood piercing my palm. Don't touch it. He stared at me, the same way he did when he trained me in the serious crime unit. Go home. I didn't move. He sighed, took out a pack of tissues from his pocket, and threw them to me. There's blood on your face. Only then did I realize that I had scratched my cheek when I climbed over the wall. Blood dripped down his chin onto the morgue table, mixing with the lingering corpse spots on the dead man's fingertips, creating a blindingly red color. The city of Pandan is still not fully awake in the early morning. I stood at the entrance of an alley in the old city, staring at the faded sign of Chen's appraisal. There is a bronze mirror in the glass display case, which is an antique that Uncle Chen helped someone identify last week. The wood chips burned in my hands. I took out my phone and sent Uncle Chen a message. Same old rules, 3 p.m. It started raining again. I looked up at the sky. The lead gray clouds were hanging very low, like a tombstone about to fall. The phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a message from Cosette. Sister Sonia, I received an anonymous package. It contains a DNA report, marked murderer. I clenched the wood chip tightly, and the rain dripped onto the screen through the ends of my hair, blurring the word murderer into a blur. It's time to put the puzzle together. The door hinges of Chen's Appraisal Institute creaked. As I spread the wood chips on the glass counter, Uncle Chen's reading glasses slipped to the tip of his nose. The cigarette he was holding flickered between his fingers, and the spark fell into the ashtray like a star that was about to go out. Same old rules. He picked up the wood chip with tweezers, his eyelids wrinkled under the magnifying glass. Last time you brought broken porcelain pieces, you said you picked them up from a crime scene. This is trickier. I stared at his fingertips. There was a very fine scratch on the back of the wood, darkened by blood. Uncle Chen turned on the desk lamp. In the cool white light, dark patterns in the wood's fibers stood out, the meshing teeth of the puzzle. He found another 4 pieces, and put the 5 pieces together, barely forming the outline of half a human face. This is custom made. He wiped the back with a cotton swab dipped in alcohol. Ordinary toy factories can't produce this kind of bite precision. The edges and corners are polished with a handmade file. I leaned over to take a look. The alcohol dissolved the bloodstains, and 3 lines of tiny letters emerged. K. Devi. A. Putra. J. Sukama. K. Devi is Cosette. My throat tightened. A. Putra is Anna. J. Sukama. Jane Sukama. Uncle Chen took over. She is the widow of Mara, the victim, right? Who mentioned her flower shop. I put the puzzle pieces in a plastic bag. Raindrops flowed down the window in lines, wetting Uncle Chen's wooden sign that read "Closed today." The phone vibrated in my pocket until it got hot. It was Cosette's location information. 2 o'clock in the afternoon. No 17 Highbane Road. Child Psychology Clinic. When the clinic doorbell rang, Cosette was squatting on the carpet, tying the shoelaces of a little girl with pigtails. When she looked up, I recognized those amber eyes, the same ones from the photo of Mara in the case file. Sister Sonia. She knocked over the toy box when she stood up, and the building blocks rolled to my feet. Didn't you say, we just wanted to chat? I squatted down to pick up the building blocks. On the back of one of the bare blocks was a faded sticker that said, Mara's Flower Shop. Is this your mother's? I asked. Cosette's fingers suddenly dug into her palm. She turned around and locked the door. The moment the curtains were drawn, the clinic was as dark as a well. Last Wednesday, she pulled out a manila envelope from the drawer. Anonymous courier, no sender. The DNA report slid out. The word murderer was circled in red pen, and the blood type column read AB, exactly the same blood type as the dandruff found in the fingernails of the 3rd victim in the Rose Lane case. I checked. Cosette's voice was trembling. The report on the case said the murderer had type O blood. She suddenly grabbed my wrist, her nails almost digging into my flesh. Sister Sonia, is it true that my mother's case has never been closed? The iron door of the dock warehouse was badly rusted. I kicked 3 times before the door creaked open a crack. The smell of mold and fish, mixed with the smell of fish, hit me in the face, and Anna's figure emerged from behind the stacked wooden boxes. There was a new wound on her forehead, and her left eye was swollen to a slit. Who asked you to come? She picked up an iron rod, her knuckles turning white. Get lost. I slapped the puzzle pieces on the wooden box. Her iron rod fell to the ground with a clang. What are you doing? She squatted down to pick up the puzzle piece. Her fingertips brushed against the inscription of A. Putra. She suddenly laughed, her shoulders shaking with laughter. That crazy woman is causing trouble again. Who? I grabbed her wrist. She slammed me aside and headed for the door. A voice came from the rain. Go ask Aunt Jane. The iron gate slammed shut, shaking the light bulb above her head and stretching her shadow very long, like a tightly twisted rope. It was dark when I got home. I spread the puzzle on the old desk, and the light from the desk lamp made my face look blue. When the 5 pieces were put together, a strange face appeared, high cheekbones, and a scar on the left eyebrow, completely different from the flat-nosed homeless man on the wanted poster. Cosette's DNA report was placed nearby. I compared the blood type column, and the ink of AB type suddenly became blurred. Just then, the phone vibrated. It was an anonymous text message. Don't check it anymore. You will regret it. I stuffed the puzzle into an iron box and locked it at the bottom of my closet. The rain was still falling, hitting the security net like someone was tapping with fingernails. The street light outside the window shone in, and there was a reflection on the iron box. It was a blood stain that had not been wiped clean, shaped like a withered rose. There is an old file bag in the corner of the closet, which contains photos of the Rose Lane case. I pulled out a picture. Mara, collapsed in the alley, with half a crushed white rose in her hand. There was a line of words on the back of the photo, written in my handwriting back then. Witnesses said the murderer smelled of jasmine. The scent of jasmine. Jane's flower shop is always filled with the scent of jasmine. I took out my cell phone and flipped to the top of the address book. Amir's name was lit up. and the last message stopped at 3 in the morning. Go home. I deleted the text message and opened the map software. Type Mara Flower Shop in the search bar, and the address pops up. 3 Rose Lane. It was only 7 steps away from the crime scene. The rain is getting heavier. I grabbed my coat and went out. The iron box hit his ribs in the bag, and the pain woke him up. The Buddhist shrine at the corner was washed white by the rain, and the incense ash flowed down the cracks in the stones like a stream of undried blood. The street lights suddenly went out. In the darkness I heard footsteps behind me. Very slowly, like someone walking while counting the steps. Preview of the next chapter. Sonia traced the source of the last puzzle piece, and found that it came from the abandoned warehouse of Mara's flower shop. On the wall of the warehouse was written a line of words in red paint. It's time to pay the debt. The scapegoat's daughter. I pressed my baseball cap down to my brow bone, and the raindrops dripped down the brim into the back of my neck. The glass door of Mara's flower shop was covered with moisture. The faded wooden sign on the door lintel was swollen by the rain, and the word Mara looked like petals eaten by insects. Jane was kneeling in front of the shrine when the doorbell rang. She was wearing a moon-white cheongsam, made of shantung silk, and her back looked like a jasmine flower wilted by the rain. He looked up when he heard the noise, and the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes formed into flowers. What flowers do you want, girl? I stared at the sandalwood Buddhist beads on her wrist. Exactly the same string that had been shown in the photo of Mara's funeral in the case file 20 years earlier. White roses, I said. For a friend. As she turned, I caught a glimpse of the metal drawer under the counter. There are fresh scratches around the keyhole, as if they were made with fingernails. I bent down and pretended to tie my shoelaces. Through the gap in the drawer I saw the corner of a yellowed photo. The face had high cheekbones and a scar on the left eyebrow, and it was exactly the same as the face in the puzzle. Do you want to wrap it into a bouquet? Jane's voice suddenly exploded above her head. I straightened up, and her eyes were just sweeping over my clenched left hand, which was still stained with sawdust from touching the drawer just now. Take a picture and send it to my friends for confirmation. I pointed my phone at the window, but the camera scanned the back alley. The bluestone road extended to the gap in the wall. The weeds were taller than a person, and half of a rusty iron door could be vaguely seen. After paying the bill and walking out, a wrinkled hand suddenly stretched out from the rain. The old lady next door huddled under the porch and said through her teeth, "Girl, that drawer has been locked for 10 years. There was mud between her fingernails. The last time I saw Mrs. Jane open it was on the 15th of last month. She brought a blue cloth bag to the alley, and it was bulging." I clenched my phone until my knuckles turned white.
Amir's office smells like instant coffee.
I pushed over the secretly taken photos of the alley and drawers. The warehouse is in the alley behind the flower shop. Jane has the key. Grandma said she goes there every 15th night of every month. He stared at the photo, and his Adam's apple moved. "Sonia," his voice was like sandpaper grinding glass, "you misjudged the case, because the witness said the murderer smelled like jasmine and Jane's flower shop." He paused. "Now, just based on Grandma's words and an old photo, it's not enough to apply for a search warrant." "Not enough?" I slammed the table. "The face on the puzzle is in her drawer, and the homeless man died clutching the jasmine petals from her flower shop." He suddenly grabbed my wrist. His hands were still as hot as before. "Do you know how fragile the police force is now? The incident of you secretly photographing the case files is still under pressure. So you want to protect her?" I shook him off. "You also said back then that Jane was the most innocent family member of the victim." He didn't say anything. The clock on the wall ticked, and I saw that his eyelashes cast a shadow under his eye, like a scar. At 3 o'clock in the morning, I was squatting by the iron door of the warehouse. The rain stopped, and the air was filled with the smell of rust. The lock was new, and I used the master key I had taken from Amir's office to poke it in. Click. The warehouse is smaller than expected. The musty smell mixed with the scent of jasmine came out. I touched the switch on the wall, and the light bulb lit up with a click. There was a leather rope on the shelf on the left which exactly matched the marks on the neck of the victim in the Rose Lane case. The glass jar on the right contains dried jasmine, which overlaps with the description in the forensic report of that year, that the murderer had dried flower fragments on his body. Hanging at the innermost part was a navy blue robe with a brown stain on the chest. I leaned over to smell it, and it smelled the sweet smell of blood. "You shouldn't be here, Sonia," the voice came from behind. I turned around and Jane was standing in the doorway. She was not wearing a cheongsam, but a black jacket, and was carrying a blue cloth bag in her hand. The moonlight shone in from behind her, and I saw water stains at her feet. Was it the alley after the rain, when Mara died? She stepped closer, spinning the Buddhist beads between her fingers. "You said the murderer was a homeless man, but he didn't smell like jasmine." She smiled. "Why do you think I come here every 15th? I retreated to the shelf, my heart aching against my ribs. The blue cloth bag suddenly fell to the ground, and several severed fingers rolled out, the little finger of Cosette's left hand, exactly the same as that of the caregiver who disappeared last week. "It's time to pay your debt." Her voice was like a snake's tongue. "The scapegoat's daughter, and you too." I grabbed the cardboard boxes next to me and piled them in front of me. Her footsteps stopped outside the shelf, and I heard the rustling of fabric. She was untying the belt of her robe, the same leather cord used by the murderer in the Rose Lane case, tied in exactly the same way. In the darkness, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a missed call from Amir. The last message was, "Don't go to the warehouse." I got a search warrant, but it was too late. Jane's hands rested on the edge of the shelf. I held my breath and watched her shadow climb up the cardboard box, like the crushed white rose beside Mara's body, slowly blooming. I curled up in the innermost layer of the pile of boxes, my back pressed against the moldy cardboard. Jane's footsteps circled the shelves twice and stopped in front of the glass jars. The medical examiner said the murderer had dried flower fragments on his body. Her voice seemed to be talking to the air. How did they know that it was me who sprinkled jasmine on Mara's body? I held my breath. Moonlight filtered in through the air, vent behind her, illuminating her fingertips as they brushed over the length of leather cord, exactly the same marks as those on the neck of the victim in the Rose Lane case. The day Cosette was rummaging through the old trunks, she suddenly laughed. I stood outside her window for half an hour. She cried, holding up Mara's silver bracelet, as if she were holding a knife. The rubbing sound of the robe hurt my ears, as it was hung back on the hook. She bent down to pick up the blue cloth bag, and the severed finger rolled to my feet. The nail was blue, which was exactly the same as the light pink nail polish in the selfie that Cosette, the caregiver, posted before she disappeared last week. They shouldn't talk about that again. Her shadow passed over the cardboard box where I hid it. Only I know what justice is. The iron door slammed shut. I counted to 100, fished out my phone and shone it. The screen was black and said, "Device locked." The puddles in the back alley reflected the moon. I ripped the fabric from the sleeves of my robe and put it in my pocket. I grabbed a handful of dried flowers from a glass jar and stuffed them into my socks. I wrapped my severed finger tightly with a convenience store receipt and pressed it against my chest. The door lock of the rental house had new scratches, and the metal sheet was warped by 0.5 millimeter. When I opened the door, I saw the sofa cushions were thrown to the ground, and the drawer of the coffee table was open. But the tin box containing old case files was still under the bed, and the secret bag of the film camera had not been touched. I spread the evidence out on the dining table. The leather cord gleamed oily under the lamp, and 2 golden fibers were mixed in with the dried flower fragments, exactly matching the description of fibers from the murderer's clothing in the on-site report 20 years ago. The phone suddenly vibrated. Amir's name popped up, and the number showed that it was a private number. "Don't answer it," I said to myself, but my finger pressed the answer button anyway. The warehouse surveillance camera captured you. His voice was tense. At 3:17 in the morning, used the master key to open the door. Who adjusted the surveillance? Someone anonymously called the police to report that the warehouse was stolen. He paused for 2 seconds. The police are now investigating you for exceeding your authority. I gripped the corner of the table tightly. The metal edge of the film camera rubbed against my palm. Is it Jane? I don't know. He coughed softly. Come to the bureau tomorrow to take a statement. After hanging up the phone, I took out my film camera. When the camera was focused on the leather cord, I suddenly remembered what Varun said yesterday. The IP address of the anonymous letter is in the southern part of Pandan City. It belongs to the same base station as the landline line of Mara Flower Shop. Varun's office is on the 18th floor of the financial building. He pushed up his gold-rimmed glasses and stared at the photos in the camera. The flow of funds requires court approval. I have physical evidence from the simple warehouse. I slapped the piece of cloth on his desk. The blood stains can be used for DNA comparison. His fingers hovered over the keyboard for 3 seconds. If this is true, what? There may be someone like her in the system. He took off his glasses and cleaned the lenses, including the case files of the wrongful conviction back then. When I came out of the law firm, it started raining again. I stood at the intersection, clutching an umbrella, my phone getting hot in my pocket. Amir sent me the location, No. 7 Spice Lane, abandoned spice shop. The door lock was badly rusted, so I pried it open with the tip of my umbrella. The musty smell mixed with the spicy aroma made it hard to open your eyes. On the second layer of the locker, a corner of a brown paper package was exposed. When it was opened, familiar smells came out. Cloves, nutmeg, and dried jasmine. Printed in faded ink on the edge of the package were the words Sukama Trading Company, Jane's family old name. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. When I turned around, a gust of wind came up, and a piece of paper fluttered from my feet. The closer you get to the truth, the more dangerous they are. The ink is not dry yet. It is Jane's handwriting in pen. The rain is getting heavier. I stuffed the spice bag into the inside pocket of my coat and ran towards Cosette's house. The street lamp shattered into pieces in the puddle, just like the blood at the Rose Lane crime scene that year, seeping out drop by drop from between fingers. As I spread out my Spice Alley finds on the kitchen table, the clock on the wall struck 11. The rope wrapped in brown paper was the twine that Jane usually used. I picked up a piece of clove with tweezers. The smell was exactly the same as the spices in the copper plate for offering to Buddha in Mara's flower shop. The blood stains on the cloth have been sent to the laboratory, but Varun said that it would take until daybreak at the earliest. The wipers drew sharp arcs outside the car. Cosette's apartment building was like a blurry shadow in the rain and fog. I rang the doorbell 3 times before she opened the door in her nightgown, with water dripping from the ends of her hair. "Sonia," she said in a trembling voice. "What happened?" I slapped the file bag on the entryway cabinet. The photo at the top shows the leather rope in the simple warehouse. The golden fibers in the dried flower debris are magnified 10 times. This is a fiber sample from the crime scene 20 years ago. She took a half step back and leaned her lower back against the shoe cabinet. In the abandoned shop in Spice Alley, I found an old package from the Sukama Company. I pulled out the spice bag and pushed it over, the old name of the Jane family. When her fingers touched the brown paper, she suddenly retracted them. Impossible. She comes to the church to donate flowers every month, and she even accompanied me to sweep my mother's grave last week. The phone vibrated in her pocket. The moment she picked up the phone, her face turned as white as paper. "No! No!" She staggered and held onto the wall, her nails leaving crescent-shaped marks on the wallpaper. "What do you want? Money? I'll give it all to you. Don't hurt her." I grabbed the phone. On the other side came an electronic voice processed by a voice changer. The daughter of a child psychologist always likes to pull her pigtails when she plays on the slide in kindergarten. Is this detail enough to prove it? Who are you? I yelled. Let Cosette listen. She took the phone back tremblingly, tears hitting the screen. She said she knew where my daughter was. I called Anna. The phone rang 7 times before being hung up. When I called again, I heard her impatient, hoarse voice. What are you doing so mad at this late hour? Jane has kidnapped Cosette's daughter. There was silence on the line for 2 seconds, and then there was a loud noise of something falling. Who are you talking about? The dock cargo hold. She panted into the phone. I followed her when she threatened me with my mother's belongings 3 years ago. The iron door of the cargo hold was so rusty that red slag could be scraped off. As Anna used a wrench to break the chain, I smelled a strong musty smell mixed with the salty smell of the sea. The innermost wooden box was covered with thick dust. The moment the lid was opened, photos fell like snowflakes. They were all faces of young girls, some of which were crossed out with red pen, and some of which had eyes gouged out like holes. I picked up one, with the date written on the back, March 1998, the first victim in Rose Lane. Anna squatted down and searched, suddenly holding up a newspaper clipping. Look at the corner. There was a sticky note on the bottom right corner of each photo, with the words "The trial is not over yet," written in crooked handwriting. I took out the business card I got from the flower shop. The abbreviated 4 words Meyer Flower Shop were exactly the same as the strokes on the note. Even the position of the pauses were exactly the same. She's not seeking revenge for Marlowe at all. I squeezed the photo. She's imitating the murderer and creating a new scapegoat for herself. Varun's video call came in at 2 in the morning. His tie was loose, and the lamp behind him illuminated the dark circles under his eyes. In the police system, Jane's fund flow has been changed 7 times. He pushed up his glasses. If you rush in with the evidence now, they will accuse you of forgery. What should we do then? Let her admit it herself. He clicked on the computer. I can forge a location information and send it to her using an anonymous SIM card. Just say, Cosette's daughter is hiding in the warehouse of Area B of the old shipyard. The rain stopped. I squatted in the abandoned watchtower of the old shipyard, and the hands of my watch pointed. The footsteps came from far away. Jane walked into the warehouse holding a black umbrella, and the ribs of the umbrella made a regular sound on the concrete floor. She lifted the empty cardboard box covered with oilcloth and turned back with a smile on her face. Do you think you can fool me? At least I tricked you into coming here. I walked out of the shadows. Her pupils shrank to the size of pinpoints. One of the ribs snapped, revealing a switchblade hidden inside. Back then you let innocent people take the blame, and now you're ruining my business. She approached step by step. Those men destroyed my Mara. I want their blood to soak every piece of the puzzle, including you. When the tip of the knife pressed against my collarbone, I threw the recorder away. Jane Sukama, everything you just said constitutes surrender. Her hand stopped. The sound of sirens came from the distance, getting closer and closer. I took out the handcuffs from my pocket, and the coolness of the metal spread up through my palms. But this time, there was no need to handcuff anyone. The red light of the recorder was still flashing. Amir's voice suddenly exploded in his ears. Sonia, I turned my head. He stood at the door of the warehouse in his police uniform, rain dripping down the brim of his hat onto his epaulettes. The moment we looked at each other, his Adam's apple moved, but he didn't say anything. But I know that when the day breaks, when this recording and all the evidence are placed on the desk in the director's office, he will tell you. Those sirens got closer, and Amir's uniform became heavy from the rain. He reached out to take the recorder from my hand, and his fingertips brushed against the back of my hand, feeling as cold as iron. The chain of evidence is complete. I handed over the recorder, the account books I had found from the flower shop, and the forged bank statements. When Varun hacked into Jane's computer, he said that the transfer records that had been changed 7 times each of which pointed to the rent of the abandoned warehouse at the dock, the place where she imprisoned Cosette's daughter.
Amir didn't answer.
The rain blurred his face, stared at my muddy cuffs, his Adam's apple moving. The bureau had a meeting this morning. Then, they'll read this. He finally reached out, and the metal recorder hit his badge. We will prosecute Jane according to the law, and clear your name. Raindrops flowed down the brim of his hat, and onto the back of my hand. I suddenly remembered that 20 years ago, on a rainy day like this, Jane knelt on the bluestone slabs of Rose Lane, holding Mara's body in her arms. She cried until she couldn't breathe, and said, "It's all my fault. I didn't protect her well." At that time I had just been transferred to the serious crime unit. Amir patted me on the shoulder and said, "Newcomer, pay more attention to the emotions of the victim's family. If you hadn't believed her tears at the beginning," I said in a hoarse voice, "would none of this have happened?" He looked down at the tip of his shoe. The reflection of his cap badge in the puddle hurt his eyes. The forensic pathologist Kobayashi's knock on the door saved the situation. She held the file bag with water dripping from the ends of her hair. Autopsy report of the homeless man. I opened the first page. Death from asphyxiation. Time of death at 2:17 a.m. The exact time Jane had threatened me in the warehouse. The second page is the puzzle bloodstain identification. The blood on the 5 fragments belongs to Cosette, Anna, and the daughters of 3 other victims. They were injected with sedatives. Shaolin pushed up his glasses, and the kidnapping took place a week ago, which matches the route of the flower truck in the surveillance footage of Jane's flower shop. She used their blood to make a jigsaw puzzle. I clutched the report, so that we would think the murderer was someone from that era. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I called Cosette and Anna to the police evidence room. The puzzle pieces lay on the table, like 5 solidified blood scars. "Help me," I said to them. Cosette's fingers trembled. When she touched the first puzzle piece, her fingernails turned blue. On the day my mother had the accident, Aunt Jane bought me a lollipop. I hid behind her and smelled jasmine on her, the same smell as the flower shop now. Anna said nothing. She grabbed a puzzle piece, and the burrs on the edge scratched her palm. Drops of blood dripped onto the puzzle and mixed with the old blood, forming a small red flower. When the 4th piece was put together, the outline of the portrait was revealed. It was not the man with the scar on the left side of his face that the police had wanted. It was a young face. His brow bone and Jane's were like carved from the same mold. "Jane's son," I said softly. Cosette suddenly covered her mouth. She took out an old photo from her bag, with hair curling around the edges. "This was my 10th birthday. Aunt Jane brought him here. He was hiding behind the door, his eyes staring straight ahead. He witnessed Jane planning the murder." I remembered the records of the mental hospital that Varun had found. Then he had a mental breakdown and was used as a tool by Jane. Last winter he showed up at the homeless rented house and was killed by Jane. Anna slammed her fist on the table. "So the old woman killed the homeless man because she was afraid he would tell her son about her." "Yes." I took out the text messages I had recovered from Jan's phone. The last one was, "He knows too much." The sending time was 3 days before the homeless man's death. Cosette cried. A photo of her daughter was pasted on the back of the puzzle, with tear marks on the edge. I thought I could sleep well if I found the murderer. Now I can. Anna held her hand. The blood from her palm rubbed against Cosette's wrist like a red rope. When I stood in the middle of the iron bridge, the rain started to fall heavily again. The 5 puzzle pieces were placed in a transparent bag and sunk into the murky river water. They hit the bridge piers, making crackling sounds, like someone beating a wooden fish. The suspension order felt like a choke in my pocket. I took it out and tore it in half. The leaves of paper were blown away by the wind. One piece floated into the river, and the other piece stuck to the moss on the bridge pier. "Do you need help?" Amir's voice came from behind. He was not wearing a police uniform, only a dark grey jacket with coffee stains on the cuffs. Exactly the same jacket he had worn when he taught me how to perform autopsies 20 years ago. I turned around. He held out his hand, palm up, just as he had done when he pulled me up in Rose Lane, the warehouse. I hesitated and held the hand. His hands were warm, like sun-dried stone. The water came up over the toes of my shoes. I looked down and saw the puzzle pieces spinning underwater. A pair of eyes were reflected in the blood-red fragments. The corners of the eyes were raised, exactly the same as in the photo of Jane's son. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I didn't answer it. Let's talk about it tomorrow. I was staring at the ceiling, counting spots of mold, when my phone vibrated beneath my pillow. The rain had just stopped at 3 in the morning, and the smell of the swollen wall was still lingering in my nose. Under the iron bridge, Xiaolin's voice was 3 times faster than usual. Another body was found. The method is very similar to the Rose Lane case. My hand that had grabbed the coat paused. The puzzle piece that sank to the bottom of the river the night before suddenly appeared before his eyes. Jane's son's eyes were rolling in the blood. The body was holding a puzzle piece. Xiaolin sniffed. There was a name written on the back. El Qasim. I sat up suddenly, banging my knees on the bedside table. El Qasim. This string of letters pierces into my memory like a steel needle. On the last page of the case report of the Rose Lane case 20 years ago, the name of the scapegoat homeless man was Qasim Li, and his son was registered as Liang Qasim. The awning is still dripping. When I arrived at the iron bridge, the cordon had already been set up. Under the blue cloth of the forensic team, the corpse was curled up like a shrimp. The index finger of his left hand poked out from the crack in the blue cloth, and there was dark red embedded in the cracks between his nails. It was not mud, but dried blood. It was clenched very tightly. Xiaolin pried his fingers apart with gloves on. It took a vise to pry it open. Inside the plastic evidence bag, the edges of the puzzle pieces were curled up and frayed. I looked closely at the back, the ink blurred by blood, and I could just barely make out ill. Like the previous 5 puzzle pieces, the blood-stained areas are old blood, and the fresh blood is only where the corpse's fingers touch the puzzle pieces. Time of death? I asked. 1 to 2 in the morning. Xiaolin flipped open the record book. There were marks of strangulation on the neck, just like the victim back then. It was made with a hemp rope. I squatted down. The body was wearing faded overalls with the knee patches worn to a shine, the kind longshoremen often wore. There were spots of mud on the legs of his pants. When he smelled them closely, he could smell the damp scent of flowers. The mud in the alley behind the flower shop. I looked up. Mara's flower shop. Xiaolin was stunned. How do you know? I didn't answer. The old case files played a movie in her mind. Jane's Mara flower shop had a pile of rotten leaves in the back alley to make flower fertilizer. The rotten leaves were mixed with red soil, and the smell was sweet but bitter. When I visited the site that year, I squatted beside the pile of rotten leaves while taking notes, and the mud on my trouser legs was exactly the same as this. The old neighborhood lady's bamboo chair is placed in front of the flower shop. She was shelling edamame, her silver bracelet jingling. Liang, who came here the other day to ask me all sorts of questions. What? I squatted at her feet. Ask Sister John if she had any customers who came here all the time. The old lady narrowed her eyes. He said his father was wrongly accused, and he wanted to find the real murderer. She suddenly lowered her voice. Last night I heard some noise in the alley behind the flower shop. It sounded like someone was arguing, and something was breaking.
What?
Glass jars. The old lady counted on her fingers. Sister Giant always pickled plums in the back alley. I could hear the sound of the glass jars colliding with my eyes closed. Liang's rental house is at the end of Spice Lane. The door was not locked, and when I opened it the musty smell made me sneeze. The walls were covered with clippings from old cases, with titles like Serial Rape and Murder Case Solved, and Scapegoat Brought to Justice, crossed out in red pen. There was an iron box at the foot of the bed. When it was opened, it contained a yellowed photo. Cosette. Anna, and 3 other girls, standing under the old locust tree in Rose Lane. They are all daughters of the victims. A voice suddenly sounded behind him. I turned around. There was a man standing on the porch, so tall that he was stooped, his overalls stained with cement dust at the knees. "It's Leon." He stared at the photo, his Adam's apple moving. The day my father was arrested, I hid behind a tree. The police handcuffed my father, and he shouted, "It wasn't me," but no one believed him. He squatted down and dragged a cardboard box out from under the bed. Later, I searched through the police station's trash and picked up these clippings. I wanted to know who killed those women. "Have you been to Mara's flower shop lately?" I asked. He looked up suddenly. "How do you know?" "The mud on the body's trouser legs." I pointed at his shoes. "It's the same as the pair you're wearing now." He was silent. After a while, he pulled out a leather bag from the bottom of the carton. 3 days ago, Aunt Jane called me to the back alley. She said she had something to give me. About my father. His Adam's apple moved again. But what she gave me was... Is it a puzzle? I remembered what was in the hands of the corpse under the iron bridge. He didn't nod or shake his head. He just said, "My father is not the murderer. He is just a scapegoat." Amir's office smells like burnt coffee. I finished repeating Liang's words. He was tapping the table with his pen once, twice, as if he was counting his heartbeats. "Case closed," he said. "Case closed?" I clenched the photo in my hand. Liang died on the iron bridge last night holding a puzzle in his hand with his name on the back. This has nothing to do with Jane's case. He died in a fight. Amir flipped through the report on the table. The surveillance camera captured him arguing with the dock worker and hitting his head during the shoving. "Surveillance?" I sneered. "The surveillance under the bridge has been broken for 20 years. You know that better than me." He said nothing. The tip of the pen poked a hole in the report. When I stood up, the chair scraped the floor and squeaked. "If you don't let me check, I'll check it myself." The abandoned warehouses in Spice Alley smelled musty and spiced. I shone my flashlight, sweeping the beam across the piles of broken crates. The lid of the innermost box was not closed tightly, and half a piece of letter paper was exposed. "To anyone who may read this, my name is Leon Qasim. My father, Qasim Lee, was the scapegoat for the Rose Lane case. The real murderer was the man who called himself the judge." The letter was torn and the back half was stained with blood. I read on. "He killed the homeless guy, my dad's cellmate, and left the puzzle. He said it was atonement, but I know he's still killing people. They're not done yet." The flashlight suddenly went out. In the darkness, I heard footsteps. It was very slow and heavy, like someone was dragging something. "Who?" I shouted. No one answered. Only the wind whimpered through the broken window. I took out my phone to light it up. Turned around. There was a huge question mark painted on the wall with red paint, as red as blood. The phone screen lit up at this moment. It was a missed call from Amir. "I don't care." My eyes swept across the corner of the wall, where there was an old diary, the cover of which was worn white, revealing the pages inside. The top page reads, May 17th, 1999, the day the first victim of the Rose Lane case was killed. The footsteps sounded again. This time they were closer. I grabbed my journal and ran for the door. The wind lifted the pages of paper, and one page floated up. I caught a glimpse of the words on it. Sister John said that she wanted their daughter to have a taste too. The door slammed shut. Cold sweat soaked my back as I broke open the warehouse door. The phone screen was lit, and Amir had 7 missed calls. I squatted in the corner and opened the diary. Leong's handwriting was crooked, and the last few pages were sandwiched with a wrinkled conversation record. She said she had seen true justice. I asked her where justice was, and she said it was in her mother's tears. She handed me a puzzle piece with atonement written on the back. She said we were all our mother's children, and we had to complete the puzzle for them. Mother's child. I clenched the diary. The victims of the Rose Lane case were all mothers, and their daughters were Cosette, Anna, and Jane's daughter. But Jane's daughter had died long ago, the one who jumped off the building after being insulted by the murderer. The iron gate of the orphanage was rusted to pieces. I rang the doorbell 3 times before I heard shuffling footsteps. The woman who opened the door was in her 40s, with a scar at the corner of her eye. Lydia Sue, Jane's younger sister. "Who are you?" She crossed her arms, and her tone was as cold as ice. "Sonia Lamour." I flashed my old badge. "Want to talk about Jane in the Mothers League?" Her fingers suddenly curled into her palms. "Who told you that?" Leon Kassim's diary. I stared at her pupils shrinking. He said a woman mentioned mother's child. Lydia Sue turned and walked into the yard. I followed her through the corridor covered with green ivy. She suddenly stopped in front of the abandoned slide and said in a voice as hoarse as sandpaper, "20 years ago, my sister and other victims' families formed a secret organization. They said the police arrested the wrong person, and the real murderer is still wandering the streets. So they're going to impose sanctions themselves. They say this is mother's justice." She took out a cigarette and lit it. "My sister always said that the law can lock up scapegoats, but not demons. They collect evidence, track suspicious people, and even what?" She put out her cigarette and said, "You should ask Anna Putera. That girl always said that a woman with an eye patch came to her and said she would help her find the murderer. The dock is piled high with cargo containers. Anna was using an iron bar to pry open a wooden box. When she saw me coming, she slammed the iron bar into the ground and said, 'Are you here to bring up old issues again?' Leon is dead," I said bluntly. "The puzzle piece in his hand has your name on the back." Her face turned pale instantly. "That woman. I remember that woman." She squatted down, digging her nails deep into her palms. She wore a black eye patch, had a scar on the left side of her face, and always smelled like spices, like the sandalwood scent from Jane's flower shop. She always asked me, "Do you hate it?" She said, "You can only find the truth if you hate it to your bones." The smell of spices. I thought of Jane's flower shop, where she always burned sandalwood in front of the Buddhist shrine. The lights were still on in Varun's law office. I told him about the Mothers' Union. He typed for 10 minutes, and a yellowed file popped up on the screen. In June 1999, Jane Sukumar, Isabel Malik, and the late social worker Lynn Myfin registered the Victims Mutual Aid Association at the church, but it suddenly disbanded 3 months later. Isabel Malik, I remember this name, the psychologist in the Rose Lane case, who was responsible for counseling the child victims. The doorbell of the old house rang 3 times. The door opened a crack, and the white-haired old lady held the door frame. "Sonia Lamar, you are older than the photo." I followed her into the living room. The desk lamp was covered with dark yellow gauze, making the wrinkles on her face look like deep grooves. "Do you think the police are the only ones who want to find the truth?" She took out an iron box from the drawer. "We mothers have been guarding our daughter's blood for 20 years. Jane said she wanted to seek justice for them. But how can justice be so clean? Leon's death has something to do with you. He shouldn't touch the puzzle." She opened the iron box, and inside lay a brass key. "This is the key to the warehouse in the back alley of Jane's flower shop. Go there, and you'll see what they've been hiding for 20 years. The wind from outside the window suddenly blew in, and the desk lamp flickered. Isabel's face suddenly turned pale, and she stared at the door behind me. Knock, knock. The knock on the door sounded like knocking on a coffin. She grabbed my wrist, her nails almost digging into the flesh. "You shouldn't have come. They are here." The key felt hot in my palm. The footsteps outside the door were getting closer and closer, mixed with the faint scent of sandalwood. I stared at Isabel's trembling lips and heard her whisper, "That puzzle is their indulgence, but also their death warrant." The knocking stopped. I held the key tightly and leaned my back against the wall. The door handle began to turn. making a slight creaking sound. The moment the doorknob turned, I dragged Isabel towards the kitchen. Her nails were still pinching my wrist, like red-hot needles. The back door had a rusty iron chain, so I picked up the copper paperweight on the coffee table and smashed the lock. "Go." She suddenly pushed me and turned to the living room and shouted, "Jane." I asked her to come here. "Let's talk it out." I didn't look back. The keys in my pocket were pressing against my thigh. The wind from the back alley was blowing into my collar, and I was running so hard that my lungs were about to explode. Jane's flower shop is at the corner of the back street. The Ma in the neon sign Mara Flower Shop is not bright, leaving only the 3 dark red letters, La Flower Shop. The warehouse door was hidden in the crack of the courtyard wall. The copper key was inserted and turned 3 times, and the lock opened with a click. The smell of mold mixed with sandalwood came out, and I groped in the dark and pressed the switch on the wall. The fluorescent lights are so bright that I can't open my eyes. The entire wall was covered with newspaper clippings strung together with red ropes, with headlines like Rose Lane serial rape and murder case, Scapegoat Varun pleads guilty, and Detective suspended for misjudgment. There were tapes in glass cases, labeled Cosette's Nightmare, Anna's Scream, and Mara's Last Call. The innermost workbench was piled with puzzle pieces, razor blades, dyes, sandpaper, and a half-used box of red paint, the same color as the puzzle piece next to Leon's body. "You're here." Isabel's voice came from the stairs. She was holding onto the railing. Her white hair was stained with grass debris, and there was a swelling on her left cheek, where she had been slapped. "We are not the murderer." She walked to the workbench and ran her fingertips over an unfinished puzzle. Leon crashed into the bridge pier by himself. He discovered the secret of the puzzle and came to confront Jane, but the kid was too impatient. I stared at another area of the wall. There were pictures of me secretly taking the case files, blurry images of me stalking Cosette, even a picture of me talking to Anna at the dock last week. The date is marked in the lower right corner, and the earliest one is 3 months ago. "You're spying on me?" "We've been waiting for 20 years. She fished a USB drive from her pocket. These tapes contain Marla's phone call before she died. She said a woman asked her to go to Rose Lane. There is also Jane's diary, where she wrote, "I want to make those who hurt my daughter also taste the pain of loss." But she didn't say that the first person she wanted to take revenge on was the real murderer who was not found out back then. I clenched the USB drive, my knuckles turning white. "So you made the puzzle, carved your name on the back, and forced me to check. We are old." Her tears fell on the puzzle, spreading a red smudge. Jane's methods are getting more and more cruel. The DNA sample Cosette received was stolen by her, and she was the one who caused the homeless man's death. We tried to stop her, but she said, "Only blood can make the police open their eyes." At 3 in the morning, I knocked on Amir's apartment door. He was wearing a wrinkled shirt and had dark circles under his eyes. When he saw the cardboard box in my hand, his face darkened. "Sonia, you've crossed the line again. Look at this." I pulled out the tape and inserted it into his old tape recorder. Mara's voice seeped out from the electrical noise. "Jane, who said there are clues to the murderer?" "I'll be right there." Amir's finger paused on the pause button. This can only prove that Mara was simplified, but it can't prove that she was the real murderer back then. And this, I flipped open Jane's diary. She wrote, "It's time for the scapegoat's son to go on his way. Leon's death was planned by her." "What about these?" He pulled out a stack of Isabel's mail. "They helped Jane forge an alibi and provide victim information. This is collusion. The law will not forgive their crimes just because they are victims. But they are also mothers." I shouted until my throat was tight. "Their daughters were raped and murdered. Their husbands were wrongly accused, and they have lived in hell for 20 years. So you can kill people." His voice was colder than mine. "Sonia, you misjudged Varun because you were too sympathetic to the victim. Are we going to repeat the same mistake now?" As I slammed the door and walked out, I heard him say behind me, "Come to the police station tomorrow to take a statement. I will hand over the evidence." The wind from the dock smells of fish. Anna was squatting behind a pile of cargo boxes, smoking a cigarette, with broken beer bottles at her feet. Isabel told me everything. I squatted down beside her. "You can testify that Jane threatened you and forced you to cooperate with the Jigsaw project. That's enough." She put out her cigarette, sparks splashing on the tip of my shoe. "When I was 8, I watched my mother being dragged into the alley. When I was 13, Jane pressed me in front of the shrine and swore never to tell. Now I'm 27, and I still want to be your witness." She stood up, her shadow covering me. "Sonia, I'm no longer a victim. I am Anna Putera, a porter at the dock who can carry 200 kilograms." She left, her footsteps mixed with the sound of waves, getting farther and farther away. The rain started in the latter part of the night. The iron bridge railings were cold from being soaked by the rain, and I took out the brass key. It stayed in my palm all day, and still had body temperature. Bite. The sound of the key falling into the sea was drowned out by the sound of rain. I opened my phone and dragged all the photos and audio backups into the recycle bin. The last text message was from Amir. "The Bureau's surveillance camera captured you entering Jane's warehouse." I pressed the call button, listened to his hello over the sound of the waves, and said, "I will cooperate with the investigation, but there are some things it should be buried forever." I hung up the phone, and the rain dripped into my eyes through my eyelashes, blurring the horizon. The key sank to a depth of 5 meters, and was swept away by the undercurrent. Suddenly, a skinny hand stretched out from the darkness, with sandalwood powder between the nails. It clenched the keys, and its knuckles made a crackling sound. The water came over the wrists, over the elbows. My cell phone vibrated in my pocket. I wiped my face and turned to walk under the bridge. Amid the sound of the waves behind me, I could almost hear the gentle sound of the key falling into the sea. I clutched my phone. The rain was still falling. The accumulated water under the bridge flooded over my heels, and the screen of my mobile phone glowed coldly in the rain. Amir's text message was like a thorn piercing his retina. "The Bureau's surveillance camera captured you entering Jane's warehouse. But what I care more about is the key that sank into the sea. It shouldn't have been taken away." At 3 in the morning, I called Lynn. "Check the communication records of the members of the Mothers Union for the past 10 years. I stood at the door of the convenience store, and the rain fell on the ground along the ribs of the umbrella. Lydia Sue, Isabel, and everyone who was with Jane back then. There was silence on the other end of the phone for 5 seconds. "Sonia, this is against the rules." Lynn's voice trembled. "I'm just the archives administrator. They may have made a deal with the top police officers." I interrupted her. "The miscarriage of justice 20 years ago was not just my fault." Silence again. The sound of windshield wipers came from her side, probably inside the car. "Tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock, the old lighthouse at the pier." She hung up the phone. The next morning, the iron ladder of the lighthouse was so rusty that it hurt my hands. Lynn was wrapped in a gray coat and had a brown paper bag in her arms. She looked around 3 times before she stuffed the bag into my hand. "It's an encrypted file. You can only log in with your old badge." There were coffee stains on the corners of the file bag. Lydia Sue's name was at the top. In the past 3 months, she had gone to the Sacred Heart Sanatorium 17 times. The transfer records were even more eye-catching. On the 5th of every month, 50,000 would be transferred out of her account, and the other party's account name was L. Sacred Heart was abandoned 3 years ago. Lynn tugged at her scarf. I checked. That place was a psychiatric hospital. 20 years ago, I clutched the file. The Mothers Union had not disbanded at all. There is a new lock on the iron door of the sanatorium. I fished out the wire from my pocket. My old trick as a former detective has not been lost. The door hinges creaked and the musty smell made me squint. The corridor on the first floor was covered with a thin layer of dust, and only Lydia Sue's shoe prints were clear. The last time she came was 3 days ago. In ward, the door lock was pried open. In the middle of the room stood an old tape recorder, with more than 20 tapes piled next to it. The label on the top plate is Mara Sukama 1919-1919-1915. Mara is Jane's late wife, and the first victim of the Rose Lane case. The tape rustled as it turned. I was standing at the entrance of the alley when he touched my daughter's face. It was Isabel's voice with a sobbing tone. I counted, and he counted to 3 before he did it. 3, 2, 1. The tape jammed. I rewound it and heard it clearly this time. Atonement is not a trial, but a cycle. Isabel's voice softened, like she was chanting a spell. We want them to have a taste of what it's like to lose a loved one. The back of my neck felt cold. I pulled out the tape and stuffed it into my pocket, then turned around and knocked over a chair. Bang! The echo exploded in the empty building. When I ran to the alley, the black car had already stopped in the middle of the road. The car window was rolled down a little, and a man in a baseball cap was sitting in the passenger seat, holding up his cell phone to take a picture of me. I ran towards the old town. The rain made the blue stone slabs slippery. I turned in the puddles and heard the tires squealing as they rubbed against the ground. To the left, someone pulled my arm. Varun's suit was covered in mud as he pulled me into the dock warehouse area. The person who was following you went to your rental house this morning. He handed me a photo. It was captured by the surveillance camera. She asked the neighbor, "Which room does Sonia live in?" The woman in the photo is wearing a scarf and half of her face is hidden in shadow. But that scar that runs from the brow to the jaw, I've seen it.
In the case file from 20 years ago, the last photo of Anna's biological mother, Elena Putera, before she committed suicide, had this scar on her.
She's not dead. My throat tightened. The medical examiner said she cut her wrists. The autopsy report was signed by Isabel. Varun pushed his glasses up. I checked it. My phone vibrates in my pocket. New text. Don't believe anything mother says. The sender is an unknown number. I stared at the back of the woman in the photo. The old apartment building behind the dock was looming in the rain and fog, with a faded Ping An apartment sign hanging outside the building. The rain is still falling. I stuffed the photo into the inner pocket of my raincoat. The wipers drew 2 blurry arcs on the windshield. Varun said the last time Elena used her ID card was at the Ping An apartments in the dock area. I walked around the building 3 times to make sure that there was no black car following us before I went up to the 3rd floor. There is light leaking through the door of room. I squatted down against the wall, the soles of my rain boots slipping on the tiles. The ventilation ducts in this old building have not been changed in 20 years. When I was a detective, I came here to investigate a theft case. I remember that the air vent of room 302 was facing the stairwell. I stood on tiptoe to reach the air vent, and the rust scratched the back of my hand so much that it hurt. A woman's voice came from inside. It was Lydia Sue's shrill voice. Jane has been too radical recently. Her killing of the homeless was ruined by Cosette's DNA sample. Now someone in the Alliance wants to get rid of her. King? Another voice was hoarse, like sandpaper grinding glass. Before Mara died, she grabbed my hand and said, "Let their children bleed too. Now you want to ruin the plan?" It was Elena. I clutched the hem of my raincoat, digging my nails into my palms. The list of evidence to be destroyed needs to be updated. Lydia Sue lowered her voice. "Especially those puzzles that Sonia checked. She can't find it." Elena sneered. From the moment she found the puzzle piece on the homeless man's body, every step was a clue we laid. I slid down with my back against the wall. The rain poured into my neck through my collar, and the chill ran up my spine. My phone vibrated in my pocket, and I hurriedly turned off the button. The light from the screen shone on the door frame. There were new scratches on the keyhole, from where I had poked it with the wire. The door clicked open. Elena stood in the doorway, the scar from her brow to her jaw glowing red in the warm light. She was wearing a washed-out blue shirt which looked exactly like the photo in the case file before she committed suicide. Detective. Standing outside the door and eavesdropping is much more professional than searching the trash cans in Rose Lane back then. I took a half step back, and my lower back hit the fire hydrant. Lydia Sue leaned out from behind her, holding a fruit knife in her hand, with brown-red stuff on the blade, like dried blood. You think you're looking for the real murderer? Elena tilted her head. You're wrong. She raised her hand and tapped her temple. We asked you to find the puzzle, to find Cosette's DNA sample, and even to expose the case file photos you secretly took, all so you can muddy the waters. My throat tightened. Why? Because some people are afraid. She pulled the blanket from the sofa and wrapped it around her shoulders. They're afraid that the scapegoat's son is still alive, and that Jane's madness will uncover the old case. She suddenly laughed. And you, Sonia Lamar, as a former detective, are just the right brick to use. The phone vibrated again. It was the address Anna had sent. No. 7. Area B. Dock Warehouse. The iron door of the warehouse was ajar. I pushed it open and the musty smell mixed with the fishy smell hit me in the face. Anna was squatting in the corner holding a rag doll in her arms, the one she always said was her daughter's most precious. You knew Elena was not dead. I blocked the door. Right. She didn't look up, digging her nails into the cotton wool of the doll. She found me 3 years ago and said, "Your mother is not dead. The blood you saw in Rose Lane that year was all smeared by me." Her voice trembled. She showed me the surveillance video of my daughter's kindergarten and said that if I dared to say a word, she would send a video of my mother's suicide to the school. What video? My mother. She suddenly looked up, her eyes full of bloodshot. My mother didn't commit suicide. It was Elena who held my mother's hand and cut her wrist, saying it was to atone for the sisters in Rose Lane. I pulled out my phone to call the police, but she rushed over and held my wrist. Don't. She has my daughter's birth certificate and the deed to my old house. She can destroy everything I have. The rain has stopped. I called Varun from the convenience store. The watermarks on the glass looked like tears. Check Elena's funds, I said. She lives in a shabby apartment, but Lydia Sue's orphanage receives anonymous donations every year. 2 hours later, Varun's voice popped up, with the hum of a printer in the background. Found out. The ultimate beneficiary of the anonymous account is the son of Chen Shufen, the social worker who fell from a building in 2001. Chen Shufen, he paused. The forensic assistant in the Rose Lane case, Isabel's apprentice. My hands were shaking as I held the phone. Chen Shufen's name appeared in the case file, and she signed Jane's alibi report. This means... Varun's voice was muffled on the phone. The Alliance's money has been stained with the blood of the old case from the beginning. At 11 o'clock in the evening, someone knocked on the window of my rental house. It was a girl in school uniform who stuffed a brown paper bag into my hand and ran away. Inside the bag was a DVD with "For Sonia Lamar" written on the cover. The TV was flickering with snow, and I almost dropped the remote control when the picture popped up. In the basement room, iron chains were hung on the cement wall. Elena held up a camera. The lens pointed at the man on the ground, the deputy team leader of the Rose Lane case 20 years ago. His left eye was so swollen that he couldn't open it. He cried and shouted, "I swear I didn't take Jane's money." It was the chief who said that the case must be closed, and that further investigation would affect the reputation of the police force. What about Mara's autopsy report? Elena's voice came from off-screen. Changed. The time of death was moved forward 2 hours to give Jane an alibi. The screen suddenly went black. A line of blood-red words popped up on the screen. Now it's your turn to choose who to believe. I grabbed my coat and rushed out the door. The rain started again. Amir's apartment was 3 kilometers away. My cell phone got hot in my pocket, and my thighs hurt from the pressure of the DVD. The voice-controlled lights in the corridor lit up one by one with my footsteps. The moment I raised my hand to knock on the door, I heard Amir's voice coming from the other side, a little hoarse and tired. Who? My hands were shaking as I knocked on the door. The door opened. Amir was wearing a faded blue plaid dressing gown, and his hair was tangled like a wind-blown palm leaf. When he saw it was me, his pupils shrank. So late, I held up the DVD. "It's from Rose Lane." He didn't answer it, but stepped aside to let me in. There were case files spread out on the coffee table, and brown scale at the bottom of the coffee cup. I put the DVD into his player, and when the TV screen lit up with snow, he suddenly grabbed my wrist. "Sonia, there's something." "Look first," I interrupted him. The moment the picture popped up, he let go of his hand. The iron chains on the cement wall of the underground room shone coldly. When the deputy team leader at that time cried and shouted, "Change the autopsy report," Amir put his knuckles on his forehead, and cold sweat seeped out of his fingers. The last line of bloody words hurt my eyes, and he suddenly pressed the pause button. "That's enough." His voice was as hoarse as sandpaper. "You saw it." I grabbed his arm. "They changed the time of death to give Jane an alibi." "I know." He shook me off, his robe sliding down his shoulders as he turned around, revealing an old scar on his collarbone. I knew it 20 years ago. I was stunned. He had his back to me, his voice muffled by the curtains. "Before the case was closed, I went to Rose Lane. Mara's neighbor said that Jane was still in the flower shop changing the water for the flowers at 10 o'clock that night. But the forensic report said that Mara died at 9 o'clock. I asked Chen Shufen, and she said with red eyes, 'Statistics don't lie.'" He paused. The next day, Chen Shufen's son received an admission notice from the orphanage. My throat tightens. So I signed the case closure report." He turned around, his eyes bloodshot. "The police force wants to save face. The chief wants political achievements. And even the victim's family is begging. Catch someone quickly. Sonia, this is not a simple case. It's a rotten system." He grabbed my shoulders. "Let this go." I shook his hand off. It was 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was standing downstairs of Isabel's house. The old-fashioned elevator creaked as it climbed up. She opened the door. Her silver hair was pinned with a pearl hairpin, like a dried white rose. "Is it for the autopsy report from that year?" She didn't invite me in, but leaned against the door frame and smiled. "The son of my apprentice Chen Shufin is now studying in a medical school in Switzerland. Guess who paid for the tuition?" I took out the video screenshots from my phone. "Jane bribed the investigators." "You were involved in the treatment of the victimized children." "Treatment?" She suddenly raised her voice. "I have treated Cosette, Anna, and all the children who were trembling under their beds. But what about their mothers? When Mara's throat was cut, Jane laid flowers on her portrait in the flower shop. When Irina's husband was made a scapegoat, Jane sent him hot soup in prison." She pulled out a stack of papers from the drawer. "Take a look at these. There are 3 death certificates." The first witness said that he saw Jane enter Mara's house, and was hit and killed by a truck the next day. The second one said that he heard Jane threaten Mara, "If you make trouble again, I will kill your daughter," and fell into the ice compartment of the fishing boat. The third one, she poked her finger on the third one, was my student, who wanted to expose Jane's capital flow, and jumped from the top floor of the archives. My hands were shaking as I held the paper. "Do you think the law can punish evil and encourage good?" She sneered. "If it could change the autopsy report back then, it can change your report now." I didn't speak. Lynn's call came at 7 in the morning. She lowered her voice and said, "I checked the itinerary of the officials involved. From 2001 to 2010, they went to the Surya orphanage every July 15th. It matches the timestamp on the puzzle." I took out the puzzle from my bag. The 7:15 on the back was wrinkled by the rain. "Also," she paused, "Jane's flower shop account transfers money to the Banland City Police Honor Fund every month." I stared at the computer screen, stringing together the itinerary. transfer records, and puzzle time into a chain. At 2 o'clock in the morning, the last page of the report read, "Systematic cover-up, from the medical examiner to the team leader, from the social worker to the director. All nodes are stained with the blood of Rose Lane." As I locked the report in my briefcase, a flash of car lights passed by the window. It's Elena. She was holding a sleeping little girl wearing a pink nightgown and a straw rope bracelet that Anna had woven on her wrist. "Is this Anna's daughter?" I took a step back. She didn't answer, but rubbed the child's face with her fingertips. "If you hand in the report tomorrow, her name will appear on the back of the next puzzle piece." She smiled. "Sonia, you can't save everyone." It started raining again. I stood at the office window holding the clasp of my briefcase in my hand. The Buddhist shrine downstairs was faded by the rain like a rotten rose. The crying voice from 20 years ago suddenly rang in my ears. That was the first time I walked into Rose Lane. Myra's little daughter Cosette was huddled under the bed, her face smeared with blood, crying and shouting, "Mom's flowers." When I squatted down to hug her, I saw a crushed rose on the edge of the bed, and the blood on the petals had not yet dried. I loosened the buckle, the briefcase clicked open, and the report lay in the dark grey velvet like a poisoned knife. I closed it and put it gently into the drawer. The sound of the lock cylinder turning was very light as a sigh. As he turned around, his eyes swept across the table. A black recorder lay quietly, with a dazzling red indicator light. When I returned to my rental house, raindrops were dripping down my hair onto my collarbone. The red light of the recorder on the table was still flashing, like a single eye staring at me. As soon as my fingers touched the metal shell, I withdrew them. They were too hot, as if someone had held them in my hand all night. I wrapped a paper towel around it and hit pause. Time display, 12 hours and 37 minutes of recording. The image of Elena standing outside my office window suddenly popped into my mind. Was the recorder already lying on my desk when she held Anna's daughter and said, "Hand in the report tomorrow and her name will be on the back of the next puzzle piece"? I dug out the signal detector from the toolbox. The instrument did not sound any alarm when the metal pen tip swept across the recorder. Not remotely controlled. Who opened it when I was away? At 3:17 in the morning, I called Lynn. When she picked up the phone, she could hear keyboard tapping in the background. "Working overtime at the archives again. We're halfway through investigating Jane's money flows." Her voice was as calm as usual. "What's wrong?" I told him about the recorder. There was silence for 2 seconds on the other end of the line. "Give me a picture of the device number." 10 minutes after the photo was sent, she called back, breathing heavier than usual. "Number 01-2003-007 on the list of evidence from the Rose Lane case." Evidence? My Adam's apple moved. "Among the evidence seized by your team, there was a batch of recording devices. They said they were searched from the suspect's residence." She paused, but the case report didn't mention their purpose. I clenched the recorder so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I had no recollection of this being a part of the list of evidence I handled 20 years ago. "Someone deliberately let you find it." Lynn's voice suddenly dropped. "Sonia, they are laying mines for you." "Varun's office is on the 18th floor of the financial building." When I pushed the door open, he was sorting through a pile of case files. He looked up and saw the recorder in my hand, and raised his eyebrows. "This thing shouldn't be here with you." I played the recording for him. Lena's voice echoed in the office. "You can't save everyone. Systematic cover-up from the forensic doctor to the team leader. All nodes are stained with the blood of Rose Lane. She is threatening you and leaking information." Varun closed the case file. "The threat is to make you shut up, and the information is to recruit you into the gang. Join them." I sneered. "Does she think I will be an accomplice? But she needs you to think she does." He took off his glasses and wiped them. "Pretend to be turned against her, and lure her into revealing more. Don't you want to know who is behind the puzzle?" I stared into his eyes behind his lenses. This lawyer who always talks about procedural justice now has a wolf-like light in his eyes. The risk is too great. Do you have any other ideas? He asked. Jane's flower shop account pays money to the police honor fund every month, and the officials that Lynn found go to the orphanage every year. These clues are like threads. Someone has to pull them to pull out the whole thread. I took out my phone and opened the social platform. The latest update was posted 3 days ago. The rain has stopped. It's time to bask in the sun. Now I deleted it and retyped. The rain from 20 years ago is finally going to stop. The comment section was quickly flooded with comments. I scrolled to the bottom and read an anonymous private message. New evidence? Send encrypted email. I want to meet up for a chat, I responded. Midnight, end of Spice Lane. While waiting for a reply for 2 hours, I dug out the miniature camera hidden in the compartment of the closet. When I pinned it to my collar, the metal buckle hurt my skin. The cobblestone pavement of Spice Lane was slippery from the rain. I stopped, counting the broken bricks under the 3rd street light. There were light footsteps behind me, like those of a cat. Detective Sonia. Elena's voice floated out from the shadows. 3 minutes earlier than the agreed time. Standing next to her was a woman in a blue cloth shirt with most of her face covered by a scarf. But I recognized those hands. I saw them yesterday at the home of an old neighbor. There was a crescent-shaped scar on her daughter's wrist when she was massaging her shoulders. "Grandma's daughter?" I asked. The scarf-wearing woman twitched her lips and said, "She's a peripheral member of the Mothers Union. Didn't Grandma tell you about that?" Elena took a step forward, and the rain dripped down her hair onto the tip of my shoe. "You think you're investigating us?" She dug her nails into my wrist. "You've been in our bureau since you picked up the first piece of the puzzle." I stared at the swaying shadows of the trees behind her, and calmly pressed the recording button on my sleeve. "Then did you know," I laughed, "that a pawn can also capture the king?" The wind blew the rain into my collar. Elena dug her nails deeper, but said nothing. The sound of sirens came from the distance, getting closer and closer. She suddenly let go of his hand, turned around and disappeared into the alley. The woman in the scarf ran 2 steps after me, then looked back at me, her eyes like a poisoned knife. I took out my cell phone. The screen was on, and there were 3 missed calls from Varun. The rain was still falling. I looked down at my watch. It was 12:07. The recorder was getting hot in my pocket, like a bomb about to explode. As I rushed into the corridor holding my phone, raindrops rolled down the back of my neck and into my collar. Varun had 3 missed calls, the last of which was 3 minutes ago. I called back, and his voice was filled with electric noise. "Your phone location shows you are in Spice Alley." "Sonia, what the hell are you?" "It's recorded." I interrupted him and took out the recorder that was burning hot from my pocket. Elena admitted that they set up a trap to lure me into the case. Now we need Lennon to do a voice print comparison. There was silence for 2 seconds on the other end of the phone. "I'll be at the old house in 10 minutes. The old house is Lennon and I's secret base, and it contains the case files that I secretly copied before I was suspended." When I pushed open the door, Lynn was waiting at the table with a laptop in her arms, water dripping from the ends of her hair. She must have come directly from the archives. "Send me the audio." She stretched out her hand, her fingertips smelling of moldy file bags. "I've checked Elena's voice print sample. There was an interview recording at the orphanage's fundraising event last year." I plugged the recorder into the computer and pressed the play button. The moment I heard Elena's voice, like a venomous snake spitting out its tongue. "From the moment you picked up the first piece of the puzzle, you fell into our trap." Lynn's fingers tapped rapidly on the keyboard. When the comparison progress bar jumped to 97%, she suddenly grabbed my wrist and said, "Look at this." 6 audio clips popped up on the screen, labeled Mothers Union Confidential Talks 2019-2023, and each clip began with the same breathing sound. The voice print overlap is 99.9%. 99.3%. She moved her Adam's apple. Yelena is the real manipulator behind the scenes. Jane may just be a pawn pushed to the front. I stared at the sound waves bouncing on the screen, and my back teeth ached. 20 years ago, I missed the loophole in Jane's alibi, and now they are using the same game within the game, using me as a pawn to explore the way. Dersulia, I grabbed my coat. In the name of cooperating with the evidence collection, Lenin grabbed the corner of my clothes and said, "She is Jane's biological sister and the director of the orphanage. The police force allocates funds to them every year, so she's even more afraid of being exposed." I pulled out the corner of her wrinkled clothes. Half an hour later, we'll be at Area B of the dock warehouse. The rain stopped at 3 in the morning. The iron door of the warehouse was so rusty that it squeaked harshly when I pushed it open. Lydia Sue stood in the shadows, wearing a washed-out gray sweater and holding a tin filing box in her arms, exactly the same one the children in her orphanage used. "You shouldn't have come." Her voice trembled. "You shouldn't have come either." I pressed the play button on my phone, and Elena's voice echoed in the empty warehouse. "But you still came, because you know that their so-called continuation of will has long become a new sin." Sulia dug her fingers into the tin box, her knuckles turning white. When Mara died, Cosette was only 7 years old, huddled under the bed and trembling. Jane knelt in front of the shrine and cried every day, saying that she wanted justice for her daughter. "So you're going to kill the homeless man the same way the murderer did, and threaten Cosette with a DNA sample?" I took 2 steps closer. "Does justice require blood for blood, or does it require dragging more people into the quagmire?" She suddenly looked up, tears in her eyes. "You haven't seen their eyes. Those mothers when their daughters were murdered. They couldn't even see the murderer's face clearly. We just want them to be able to touch the murderer's bones before they close their eyes."
What about now?
I pulled up the comparison report sent by Linan. Irina's account pays money to the police honor fund every month. You bribed not only the murderer, but also the police. Lydia Sue's lips were pursed into a line. I took the opportunity to hand over my phone. "Hand over your core information, and I promise not to disclose your identity." The metal box fell to the ground with a clang. When she squatted down to unlock the door, I saw an old scar on the back of her neck, exactly the same place as described in Mara's autopsy report, where the murderer had hit her with the back of a knife. "This is Mara's diary." She pulled out a stack of yellowed papers and a hard drive which contains all the transfer records and action plans. It was just after 5 in the morning when the hard drive was connected to Lynn's computer. The progress bar climbed slowly, and Lynn's breathing became heavier. When the words "Deputy Mayor Wu Jixiong" appeared in the document title, she stood up abruptly, and the chair made a harsh sound on the concrete floor. "He is in charge of municipal engineering. He was the one who signed the approval document for the orphanage expansion." She dug her nails into her palms. "No wonder the audits are always so difficult. It turns out, I closed the computer before she collapsed. Deal with the evidence first." The lights in the forensic room came on. Kobayashi was leaning against the door in a white coat. His hair tie was loose, and the dark circles under his eyes were even darker than mine. "You picked a really great time." She pulled at her mask. "It's 6 in the morning. The surveillance camera is in a blind spot. The medical examiner on duty is catching up on his sleep in the locker room." I pushed the hard drive and file bag over to me. "Send it anonymously to an independent monitoring agency, and upload the backup to the cloud." She didn't answer, and stared down at the tip of her shoe. My dad was the deputy team leader of the Rose Lane case back then. Her voice was as light as a sigh. "The signature on the case report is his, but he said that someone above was putting pressure on us and that the case must be concluded within a week." I suddenly remembered the old photo hanging in Kobayashi's office. A middle-aged man in police uniform, holding a little girl in a floral dress, with the old Banlan City police station in the background. "So you helped me." I reached out and touched the back of her hand. Not for me, but for him. She looked up suddenly, tears in her eyes. It will take half an hour to copy it. She grabbed the hard drive and rushed into the lab, the hem of her white coat sweeping across the water on the floor. Wait in the stairwell. Don't let the person on duty see you. I leaned against the fire door and listened to the hum of the printer in the lab. At 7 o'clock, Charlin came out holding a sealed file bag, with broken hair on his forehead. 3 anonymous letters, sent to the Supervision Bureau, the newspaper, and the mayor's mailbox respectively. The cloud uses a dark web server, and they can't delete it unless they hack into the root node. When I took the file bag, she suddenly grabbed my wrist and said, If they find out about my dad, he was just coerced. I interrupted her. The real criminal will reveal himself. When I walked out of the forensic room, a light drizzle started to fall from the sky. I looked up at the dark clouds, and the raindrops fell into my eyes, making them sore and painful. In the distance came the whistle of an early morning bus, mixed with the sound of someone's radio. Banlan City's today's news headlines. I took out my cell phone and turned off the radio. The drizzle dripped down the ends of my hair onto the screen of my phone, turning time into a blurry spot of light. This round is not over yet, I said to the air, my voice mostly swallowed up by the sound of rain. The phone in his trouser pocket vibrated. It was a message from Lin In. I have retrieved surveillance records from the deputy mayor's office. The rain was getting heavier, and as I ran to the subway station, I caught a glimpse of a newsstand on the corner. The headline on the front page was blurred by the rain, but the word investigation was still clear, like a knife that had been sharpened for 20 years and was finally about to draw blood. My cell phone was vibrating so hard in my trouser pocket that it hurt. I wiped the rain off my face and looked down at the screen. A news push popped up with a headline that blinded me. Investigation into gang-related cases at the Banlan city government has been launched, and several senior officials are being questioned. The newsstand owner was shouting, "Newly arrived morning papers. The deputy mayor's account books have been found." I took out the crumpled banknotes and placed the wet newspapers on my palms, my fingertips turning gray from the ink. In the front page photo, the man in a suit was handcuffed, and his back looked very much like the director who made the final decision on the case report 20 years ago. The iron bridge in the rain was shaking before my eyes. I walked towards the bridge hole, according to my memory. On the concrete pier, there was still the white chalk line left when Liang's body was moved away. There was half a puzzle piece floating in the puddle, its edges worn and rough. It was from the same batch as the 5 pieces that were scattered when he died. He finally waited for me. I squatted down and touched the puzzle piece in the puddle with my fingertips. The wind blew the sound of waves into my ears. I vaguely saw the boy who always picked up waste under the bridge, hiding under the plastic sheet and smiling at me. "Officer Sonia, can you reopen my father's case?" The phone rang again. It was Amir's number. "Open the door." His voice was mixed with the sound of rain. "I'm downstairs." There was still a damp and musty smell in the corridor. When I turned the door lock, he was looking down at the toes of his shoes, and the epaulettes of his police uniform were shiny from being soaked by the rain. In his arms was a brown paper bag with a red seal of Banlan City Police Department on it. A formal letter of apology from my superior. He handed the bag to me, and a transfer order to reinstate me as a police officer. The brown paper rustled. I pulled out the topmost document. The words, "This bureau deeply regrets the injustice caused to Comrade Sonia Lamar due to the miscarriage of justice in the Rose Lane case 20 years ago," were soaked with watermarks, like a ball of blood that could not be dissolved. "You already knew the truth." I slammed the document on the coffee table. "Why didn't you stop it?" His Adam's apple moved. Thunder exploded outside the window, and his voice was shattered into pieces. "I thought silence could protect more people. Protect you, Protect those witnesses who were threatened back then. Protect your own career. I interrupted him. He suddenly looked up. His eyes reddened. My dad took sleeping pills on the night the old case was closed. He said he was sorry for the scapegoat. Sorry that the real murderer was still wandering the streets. He grabbed the jigsaw puzzle on my desk. I've been investigating for 3 years. I found surveillance footage from the deputy mayor's office, and that Jane's flower shop account was transferring money to senior officials every month. But every step forward, there were witnesses who changed their testimonies and evidence that disappeared. The sound of rain gradually faded. He fished out an old police badge from his pocket, the edges of which were polished to a shine. My mom said you dropped it when you went on your first mission. You squatted on the ground looking for it for half an hour, saying that the police badge was a policeman's bones. I took the badge. The metal felt hot against my palm. Lynn's call came at 3 in the afternoon. She cried. I found my dad's work notebook, and inside it was a copy of Jane's remittance slip. When I pushed open the door of the archives holding the cardboard box, she was kneeling on the ground with a pile of yellowed files in front of her. The sunlight filtered in through the blinds, cutting golden lines on the cover of the Rose Lane rape and murder case. These are the materials that have not been exposed. I pushed the cardboard box over. Jane's overseas account flow. The surveillance screenshots of the deputy mayor's son destroying evidence for her. And my father's signature. She pulled out a piece of paper, her fingers shaking. He signed and agreed to seal up the key evidence. I squatted down and looked her in the eye. Some things should not be hidden anymore, but you have to decide whether you are willing to bear the consequences. She wiped her face and gathered the documents in her arms. My father said before he died that the thing he regretted most in his life was not slamming the door on the case closing report. When she looked up, her eyes sparkled. I want to slam the door for him. The clinic's doorbell rang crisply. Cosette ran out of the consulting room with a children's drawing in the pocket of her white coat. It was a sun drawn by her new little patient. Don't be afraid anymore. I held her hand. She smiled, with tears in the corners of her eyes. I know. Jane's flower shop was closed yesterday, and the police found my sister's necklace in the freezer. There was a noise coming from the inner room. Anna lifted the door curtain. Her arms were still stained with rust from the dock, but she carefully held an iron box. I found this when I was sorting out my adoptive mother's belongings. She hid it under the attic floor. There was a letter in the iron box, with several holes on the edge of the envelope caused by insects. As soon as I pulled out the letter, Cosette suddenly said, "My mother said before she died that only you can understand its meaning." The ink was a little blurry, but still legible. Atonement is not for others, but for not being lost again. The leaves of the sycamore trees outside the clinic rustled. I looked up and saw a crack in the clouds, the sun leaking in and turning the raindrops into golden powder. "Do you want to go back to the police station?" Amir's voice came from behind. He leaned against the car door. His police uniform changed into a clean one, his epaulettes gleaming in the sun. I touched the letter in my pocket. The wind lifted the corners of my clothes, bringing with it the salty and humid smell of the sea. The sound of a ferry whistle could be heard in the distance, the same as that rainy night 20 years ago, yet different. Wait a minute. I turned and walked towards the alley. Some things need to be figured out by yourself first. The shadows were stretched long by the sunlight. When I reached the corner of the street, something fluttered over my head. I looked up and saw a white dove, its wings cutting through the remaining raindrops in the air, leaving a half-silver line. The letter moved slightly in my pocket. I squeezed it and continued on. The sun is shining. I opened the door of the rental house in the dark. The ceiling light flickered, and a warm yellow glow spread across the table. The cardboard box was still in the corner, and inside it was the iron box I brought back from the clinic this morning. The worm-eaten letter was lying in my palm, and the ink glowed dark yellow like old paper under the light. I pulled over a chair and sat down. He rubbed his fingertips over the words, "Atonement is not for others," on the letter, and suddenly stopped. There was an imperceptible silver glow on the edges of some of the strokes. I tilted the letter 30 degrees toward the light. The ink suddenly became bright, not the original black, but a faint blue color of some invisible ink activated by light. There was still the old notebook of the former detective in the drawer. I took out the reagent spray and gently sprayed it on the letter paper. The blue handwriting slowly crawled across the blank space like an awakened snake. The key is not the end, but the beginning. The phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a message from Linen. "The files have been retrieved. See you at the archives at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning." I stared at the screen and replied, "Now." She replied in seconds. "Old location. There is always a draft in the back window of the Banlan City archives." When I pulled my coat tightly around me and pushed the door open, Linen was slapping a stack of documents on the table, her hair stained with night dew. 20 years ago, the municipal government allocated $3 million for a women's shelter. The project was approved, but not built, and the money went into a private trust. She turned to the last page, and the red seal hurt her eyes. "The beneficiary is Lydia Sue." "Lydia Sue from the orphanage." "Yes." Linen pushed up her glasses. "On the day her sister Jane's flower shop was closed down, there was a transfer of $500,000 into this account. The rain stopped at 3 in the morning. I stood in front of the iron gate of the orphanage, rust staining my trouser legs. Lydia Sue opened the door. She was wearing a grey cloth shirt with milk powder stains on the cuffs. When she saw it was me, her pupils shrank. "Come in." The candles in the chapel were dancing. Her fingertips trembled as she pushed the photo towards me. "The author of that letter is not Cosette's mother." The photo has the yellow tinge of old photographic paper. 5 women in plain dresses stood in front of the brick house. The young girl at the edge had a ponytail, and the hem of her white shirt tucked into her blue skirt. She was not on the list of the Mothers Alliance in the Rose Lane case. "Who are they?"
The mother of the victim back then.
Sulia touched the silver cross around her neck. "She is a social worker, Evelyn Tuan." The lights in Varun's law office were still on late at night. The sound of his typing was like knocking on my nerves. Comparison with the legal database. Evelyn Tuan, registered for social worker qualification in 1998, cancelled in 2001. He suddenly paused. "Wait, she re-registered 3 years ago." "Register for what?" "Civil servant information." He turned the screen, and the blue light made my temple ache. Deputy Director of the Social Welfare Bureau of Banlan City. The phone vibrated on the coffee table. When I picked it up, the screen lit up with a message from an unfamiliar number, and there was only one line of text. "Don't check anymore, or you'll be the next to die." I put my phone upside down on the table. The light from the computer screen reflected my red eyes. My fingers hovered over the keyboard and finally pressed enter. The words Evelyn Tuan's current position in the search bar had not yet disappeared, and a new page had already popped up. The news that Banlan City Social Welfare Department Deputy Director Evelyn Tuan attended the groundbreaking ceremony of the Children's Welfare Home was accompanied by a picture of her wearing a navy blue suit. Her temples dyed silver, and she was holding the mayor's hand and smiling. There was a flapping sound outside the window. I looked up and saw the white dove flying across the glass, its shadow flashing across the screen. The keyboard is still hot. I checked her public schedule and saw that she would be visiting the Sunshine Children's Home next Friday at 10 a.m. Hover your mouse over the print button. It started raining again. I clutched the printed itinerary. Evelyn's public schedule is marked with public welfare supervision of Suburban Psychological Clinic every Wednesday at 2 p.m. But if you look through the official website of the Municipal Welfare Bureau, you will find only 2 lines of words in the public welfare record of this Chengguang Psychological Clinic. It was registered in 2020, and the service targets are written as special groups. Special group? I typed these 4 words on the computer. and Lennon's voice popped up. I just checked the clinic's records. The legal representative is Evelyn's college classmate. The shareholder changed 3 times 3 years ago. She paused. Today is Wednesday. She is there from 2 to 4. I tore off the map of Pandan City on the wall and circled the location of the clinic with a red pen. At the junction of the old city and the industrial area, backed by an abandoned rubber plantation. At 1:30 in the afternoon, I stood at the door of the clinic wearing my washed-out volunteer vest. The temporary work badge on his chest was obtained by using a copy of his former colleague's police ID half an hour ago. The receptionist glanced at it and said, "Help the archive room on the 2nd floor to sort out the old medical records. Don't rummage through them. The archive room is at the corner of the stairs." I took out the thin wire from my sleeve, turned the lock 3 times, and it opened with a click. There is a combination lock hanging on the metal cabinet against the wall, and there are light oil stains on the edge of the keyboard. 4-7. I pressed it and the door popped open. The pages of the list in the brown paper bag were yellowing. The title of the first page is Key Observation Object. The second line reads Cassette Devi Relationship, Victim's Second Daughter, and the third line reads Anna Putla Relationship, Victim's Adopted Daughter. I turned the pages faster. The last page was marked in the lower right corner with LK 20224, Leon Kassim, the homeless man who died under the bridge, the son of the scapegoat. The phone vibrated in my pocket. Lynn's message: just hacked into the clinic system. These people were marked as potentially unstable 3 years ago. I stuffed the list back into the paper bag and heard footsteps as I locked the cabinet. Hiding behind the file rack, I saw the hem of Evelyn's navy blue skirt flash by. She was holding a black folder in her hand and entered the innermost office. At 6 o'clock, all the lights in the clinic went out. I walked along the wall to the back door and used the master key to unlock the office door. The safe against the wall glowed coldly, with fresh scratches on the combination dial. I fished out a note I'd torn from Evelyn's diary, on which was written in blue pen, Mara's death anniversary 1990-1999-520, the first of the 5 victims, 5020. The safe is open. The diary cover is dark brown leather, and the first page reads, Mother's Union. I turned the pages quickly. Jane's emotions need to be controlled. She is too impatient. Liang's father is about to confess. We have to give him a surprise. In the lower right corner of the last page, pen words spread out. Atonement is not for justice, but for control. Bite. The radio suddenly sounded. Sonia Lama, we've been waiting for you for a long time. The electric sound made my ears hurt. I grabbed my phone and took 3 photos. My finger typed in the dialog box. If I lose contact, give these to the supervisory agency, and sent them to Varun. Footsteps were heard coming down the corridor. I lifted the baffle of the ventilation duct and crawled in. The metal wall hurt my back. The person below stopped at the office door, and the sound of the key turning was like knocking on the forehead. The ventilation duct leads to the roof. I climbed out along the iron sheet, and the rain started falling again, pouring into my neck, through the collar. When I jumped onto the fence, I heard a dog barking. I turned around and saw 2 dark figures holding cell phone lights running towards me. I rushed into the repair shop at the corner of the alley, picked up the tire brush in the corner and threw it on the ground. The guy chasing me slipped on it, and I turned into another alley, took off my jacket and tied it to the handlebars of the abandoned motorcycle. By the time they pounced on me, I had already gotten into the back window of Kobayashi's house. Are you crazy? Xiaolin held up an alcohol cotton pad to wipe the scrape on my elbow. She glanced at the photos on my phone and suddenly paused. Before my father died, her Adam's apple moved. He said there was a woman who always went to the morgue in the middle of the night and smiled at the photos of the victims. He said that was the real judge of Rose Lane. I looked out the window at the rain gradually stopping. My face was reflected in the puddle, and my eyes were so red that they seemed to be bleeding. The phone vibrated in his pocket. It was Varun's reply. Got it. The rain stopped, and the wind blew in the damp smell of rust. I suddenly understood that those blood-stained puzzles and those marked names were never meant to let the victims rest in peace. They were nets, threads, and the weights used by Evelyn and others to control everything. Shaolin handed me the hot coffee, and I stared at the brown sediment at the bottom of the cup. Tomorrow, I will give Varun a copy of Evelyn's diary. But before that, I have to figure out how many people will be trapped by the control she mentioned. Varun was opening a bag of ginger candies when I slapped the typed copy of the diary on his desk in his law office. Cosette said you hid at Kobayashi's house for half the night last night. He pushed his gold-rimmed glasses and ran his fingertips over the page of Mother's Union. This is not a photocopy. I took it with my phone. I pulled a chair and sat down, the back of the chair rubbing against the bruise on the back of my neck. Can it be used as evidence? He didn't respond. The pages turned rustlingly until they stopped at the last page. Atonement is not for justice but for control. His knuckles suddenly turned white, and the ginger bag wrinkled his palms. This is not a simple revenge organization. There was a cold light in his eyes when he looked up. It is a systematic manipulation mechanism, using the pain of the victims' families as fuel, using doing justice for the heavens as an excuse. They are training their own puppets. My throat tightened. Jane is just a pawn. He took out a pen and underlined the sentence. Leon's father is about to confess. We have to let him accidentally. Leon is the son of the scapegoat 20 years ago, a homeless man who died under the bridge last month. His father confessed because someone threatened to kill his wife and children. I clutched my cuffs. The interrogation record of the scapegoat did describe an emotional breakdown. I thought it was fear at the time, but now I see it as despair. We need a witness. Varun suddenly closed the book. Evelyn's diary mentioned a member of the Mothers' Union, but she didn't write her name. We need a living person who can identify her. I understood the second half of his sentence that he didn't say. Evelyn was too cunning to be convicted with just the diary. The rain started falling again. I stood outside the glass door of the tea house and watched Evelyn come in with a black umbrella. She was wearing a beige suit and her hair was neatly tied up, as if she had just stepped out of a meeting at the welfare department. Detective Sonia. She sat down across from me. The waiter brought jasmine tea and she pushed it in front of me. I heard that you are investigating the old case in Rose Lane. I pressed the record button on my phone, and cold sweat broke out on my fingers, hidden under the table. You are not a relative of the victim. She smiled, and the fine lines at the corners of her eyes smoothed out. Finally found it. The members of the Mothers' Union are all the survivors of the victims. I stared at the hazel mole behind her ear. But Myra's widow is Jane, the youngest daughter is Cosette, and the adopted daughter is Anna. You are not on any list of relatives. I was an intern in 1990, 1999. Curious. Every day I looked at case files, watched the real murderer being released on bail, watched the scapegoat being forced to sign a confession, and watched the victims' families crying in the corridor until they were dehydrated. So you formed a Mothers' Union? I was just the one who handed her the knife. She put down the cup. I was there when Jane's daughter was raped to death by the murderer. She knelt at the door of the forensic room, digging her nails into the cracks between the tiles, and said, "I want him to die." I gave her the knife, the same one the murderer used. My temples were throbbing. Leon, the homeless man, his father was a scapegoat, and he wanted to overturn the verdict. Her tone was as calm as if she was talking about the weather. Jane killed him in the same way. I wrote to the anniversary of Marla's death in her diary to guide her to open the safe. Guide me, you're the only one who can break this cycle. She suddenly grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. Those puzzle pieces, those DNA samples, even the leaked case file photos you secretly took, They were all clues I put there. Only the persistence of a former detective can put all the pieces together. I pulled my hand back, but the phone continued recording. Emir's office smells like old newspapers. When I put the recorder on his desk, he was reading Liang's autopsy report. Do you know how many current senior police officers are mentioned in this recording? He didn't look up, and the pen cap was spinning rapidly on his fingertips. The archivist back then is now the Deputy Director of Criminal Investigation. The bail lawyer back then is now the Attorney General. So you want to protect them? It's not them I want to protect. He stood up suddenly, and his chair hit the wall. It's the ordinary people who have believed in the badge for 20 years. If this recording is exposed, the people of Banlan will feel. Do you think the police are in league with the murderer? I interrupted. They should have known it long ago. He stared at me, and his Adam's apple moved. Finally, he bent down to pick up the recorder, and the red indicator light flashed in his palm. You will regret it. What I regret is that I didn't see through Jane's tears 20 years ago. I turned and opened the door, and the rain rolled in and wet my trouser legs. This time, I won't make the same mistake again. The sunlight the next morning was so blinding that it was hard to open your eyes. My phone vibrated on my bedside table. The email was titled, "To Sonia."
Thank you, Sonia. Evelyn's electronic voice was filled with the noise of electricity. Now, it's your turn to become the new Inquisitor.
I stared at the computer screen, my fingers unconsciously stroking the puzzle pieces on the corner of the table. It was picked up from the crime scene of Liang, and the blood-stained edges were still very prickly. Outside the window I could hear the hawkers selling nasi lemak, and someone was worshipping in front of the Buddhist shrine across the street. But I know that in the damp alleys, behind the faded filing cabinets, the threads controlled by Evelyn are quietly wrapping around another person's wrist as she leaves. The wind blew the curtains, and the puzzle pieces spun gently on the table. I looked at the shadow it cast, and suddenly remembered what Shaolin said. Her father said before he died that the smiling woman in the morgue was the real judge. And now that woman's position is vacant. My fingers rested on the fragments. Raindrops dripped along the windowsill, leaving a small mark on the wooden table, just like the ink stains on the last page of a diary. It was getting dark. I didn't turn on the light, staring at the puzzle pieces glowing in the darkness. What will happen tomorrow? I sat in the dark all night. The puzzle pieces were placed under the desk lamp, and the bloodstains glowed brown-red in the warm light. Evelyn's email flashed 7 times on my phone's screensaver before I flicked it off. She said, "It's your turn to be the new Inquisitor." But I stared at the teeth marks on the fragments. That was the angle at which the fragments burst out of Leon's pocket when he was hit by a blunt object, which was exactly the same as the blood splatter trajectory at the Rose Lane case scene 20 years ago. This is not a trial, it's a trap. At 5 in the morning, I sent Lynn a message. Check Evelyn Tuan's internship records at the Social Welfare Department in 2003, focusing on her contact records with the Rose Lane victims. She replied quickly. The archives will open in half an hour. I'll wait for you. The air conditioning in the archives was freezing cold. Lynn's fingers flew across the keyboard, and the blue light from the screen made the dark shadows under her eyes even darker. Found it. She paused suddenly, and the mouse wheel stopped on a yellowed PDF. In the 2003 intern evaluation report, Evelyn was criticized for over-involvement in victim psychological intervention, and the instructor's signature was Martha Raman. I leaned closer to the screen. Martha Raman. This name appears 3 times in the old case files of the Rose Lane case. She was one of the founders of the Mothers Union. Official records say she died in a car accident in 2005, but I remember it more clearly. I saw her in the morgue in November. Her face was covered with a white cloth, but there was a crescent-shaped scar on the inside of her wrist, exactly the same as the customer signature I saw in Jane's flower shop account book. This file has been encrypted. Lynn tapped on the keyboard, but I can retrieve the original scan using Amir's permissions. She clicked on the attachment, and an old photo popped up. Evelyn in a beige suit, standing next to Martha, and between them was Cosette, the daughter of Mara, the first victim of the Rose Lane case. Cosette was only 7 years old at the time, curled up in Martha's arms, with Evelyn's hands on her shoulders, her nails painted the same burgundy as Martha's. I squeezed my phone. Evelyn said she was laying out clues, but these clues had been woven 20 years earlier. Varun's law firm is located on the 23rd floor of the Marina building. As I was waiting for the elevator holding the USB drive, I suddenly felt a chill on the back of my neck. The moment the elevator door opened, 2 men in suits blocked the door. I know the guy on the left, Reza Norman, the legal advisor of the Social Welfare Department, and on the right is a reporter from the Pandan Times, with his camera pointed directly at me. Miss Sonia. Reza smiled like a stone soaked in honey. We have received a report that you obtained the private information of public officials through illegal means. Need I remind you that the maximum sentence for defamation is 3 years?
The reporter came over with a microphone in hand. Excuse me, are you using your status as a former detective to conduct a malicious investigation into Deputy Director Evelyn? I took a half step back, my back touching the cold marble wall. Evelyn was more ruthless than I thought. Not only did she fight back, she also wanted to nail me to the cross of public opinion. No comment. I turned aside to leave, but Reza blocked my way. Half of a silver chain was exposed from the cuff of his suit, and the pendant was a faded rose exactly the same as the decoration in the window of Jane's flower shop. I'll give you another 10 minutes. He lowered his voice. Delete the data and pretend nothing happened. The elevator dinged. I stared at his Adam's apple and suddenly remembered what Kobayashi said. The smiling woman in the morgue was the real judge. Now that Martha is dead, Evelyn is in power. And Reza, the rose on his sleeve may be another thread. I turned and rushed into the emergency passage. In the stairwell I sent a message to Shaolin. Send the compressed file in my mailbox anonymously to the police complaints department. I called Varun again. Contact Alina from the Herald. She owes me a favor. At 6 o'clock in the evening, the rain started again. I squatted in the back alley of Evelyn's secret clinic, with my phone camera pressed against the crack in the wall. The surveillance light was spinning overhead, and I counted its pattern. It scanned once every 45 seconds. On the third lap, the iron gate opened a crack, and Evelyn came out, holding a black umbrella. Opposite her stood a woman in a grey coat, her back to me, but her silhouette. I held my breath. That was Fatima Hassan, the sister of the second Rose Lane victim. The case file stated that she committed suicide by jumping into the sea 15 years ago, and her body was washed up in the mangroves. I signed the case closing report myself, but now her hair is black. She had dyed it burgundy before. She has no ring on her right hand. She had a silver ring on her left ring finger before, etc. I zoomed in on the photo. Fatima turned half of her face and saw a mole on her left cheek, which was exactly the same as the photo on the death certificate in the case file. She was holding something in her hand, which reflected the light under the umbrella. I zoomed in on the photo and my pupils contracted. It was a puzzle piece with the letters engraved on the back. E. Norman. Reza Norman's initials. Raindrops hit the phone screen, and the photo became blurred into a watermark. I stared at the letters E. Norman, and suddenly remembered the rose pendant on Reza's cuff that morning. Jane's flower shop, Martha's scar, Evelyn's burgundy nails, Reza's roses. These fragments formed a circle in my mind, and at the center of the circle was the wrongly convicted case. 20 years ago, the phone vibrated in my palm. It was a message from Varun. Lena agreed to the front page tomorrow, but more evidence is needed. I looked up at the window on the second floor of the clinic and saw Evelyn's shadow passing by. Fatima is gone, but the puzzle pieces she left behind still glow coldly in the photo. E. Norman. This name is like a needle, piercing all my reasoning. The rain is getting heavier.
I stuffed my phone inside my coat and turned into the rain. Tomorrow it's time to check on Reza Norman. The next morning at 7 o'clock, instead of going to my usual cafe to buy iced coconut milk, I went straight to the archives. Lynn's workstation was in the innermost room. The blinds were drawn, and the fluorescent lights were crackling so loudly that it made one's brain hurt. Charlie E. Norman. I pushed the photo of Fatima working on a puzzle on my phone, the screen still stained by the rain from the back alley. Lynn pushed up his metal-framed glasses and typed rapidly on the keyboard. Reza Norman's sister, Alina. She suddenly paused and spun the mouse wheel. She was registered missing 15 years ago. She is a psychology graduate student and participated in the Morning Light Project, psychological intervention program for minors. I remember it was mentioned in an old case, but it was later urgently stopped because parents reported child abuse. Linen nodded. The case file has been sealed, but I have hacked into the internal system. Elena was the core of the execution team. After the scandal broke out, she disappeared, and the social welfare department didn't even issue a death certificate. I squeezed my phone. Fatima's resurrected face, the surveillance camera at Evelyn's clinic, the rose pendant on Reza's cuff. All these fragments suddenly became one. Reza's apartment address. I knocked on the corner of her desk. Lynn looked up, worry in her eyes. Sonia, you're walking on a tightrope. Someone has to clean up the mess from 20 years ago. I tugged at the hem of my soaked coat. Address. She sighed and wrote a string of numbers on the note. 1802, Pandan Bayview. He lives alone. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I was standing downstairs of the Bayview apartments. The security guard stopped me, and I held up my phone. Mr. Norman has asked me to seek legal advice regarding the compensation agreement for the families of the victims of the Rose Lane case. The elevator reached the 18th floor. The moment the door opened, the aroma of sandalwood mixed with freshly ground coffee gushed out. Reza was wearing a white shirt with his sleeves buttoned tightly, and a rose pendant flashed under his collarbone. Ms. Rama, I am a rare guest. I want to consult you in person about some clauses. I squeezed in sideways and glanced at the living room. The dark walnut bookshelf took up half of the wall. The third shelf was filled with essence of criminal law practice, and the fourth shelf was collection of trust law cases. He led me to the sofa and went to kitchen. Do you want some milk? The opportunity has come. I walked quickly to the bookshelf and ran my fingertips over the spines of the books. The book on the innermost side, Southeast Asian Inheritance Laws. When it was pulled out, the interlayer wood board made a click sound. A piece of letter slipped into my palm. The handwriting was sloppy and had yellowing edges, and it was signed Elena. Brother, I forgive you, but I will not let justice be covered up again. The last few words were blurred, as if they were written by tears. What are you looking for? I turned around. Reza stood at the kitchen door, turning the coffee cup between his fingers. His smile was gone, and his eyes were like knives tempered with ice. Elena's still alive. I slapped the letter on the coffee table. Right. The sound of rain suddenly became heavier, and the glass was smashing loudly. He stared at the letter for a long time. His Adam's apple moving. Evelyn can revive her. A fake identity. A new name. And even a new life. He touched the rose pendant. She became the core of the new branch of the Mothers' Union after the split, specializing in dealing with traitors. Fatima. I thought of the woman who came back from the dead in the back alley photo. Is she the one being dealt with? She wants to quit. Reza stared down at the letter, his voice hoarse as sandpaper. According to Evelyn's rules, quitting is betrayal. I took out my phone to record it, and he suddenly laughed, which was uglier than crying. No need to record it, Lynn can find out all this. Elena has used 7 pseudonyms in the past 15 years, and all the money from the government psychological projects she participated in went into Evelyn's trust fund. At 11 o'clock in the evening, 3 streetlights in Spice Lane were broken. I walked along the wall to the end of the alley with a flashlight. The iron door of the abandoned textile factory was rusted. I kicked it twice, and it creaked open, and a smell of mold mixed with the fishy smell of seawater rushed out. The flashlight swept across the ground, and a piece of the puzzle lay in the broken glass. I squatted down, and just as my fingertips touched it, my heart skipped a beat. On the back was engraved S. Rama, my name. The rain was getting heavier again, and the water droplets hit the puzzle, making the letters shine. I squeezed it tightly, turned around and tried to run, but the footsteps were getting closer, making a pattering sound in the puddles. Welcome to the true cycle of atonement, Sonia. The sound seeped out from the shadows behind, like velvet, soaked in poison. I looked up, and 2 outlines gradually became clear in the rain. One was Evelyn's burgundy nails, and the other was the location of the mole in the photo of Fatima's back alley. I suddenly didn't dare to guess what would happen next. Raindrops hit the back of my neck. I tilted my head back and the rain flowed down my chin to my collar. Evelyn's burgundy nails looked like drops of blood in the rain. The woman standing next to her. I've seen her photo. The girl with pigtails in the photo frame. In Reza's study. At this moment she had the same teardrop mole at the end of her eye as Reza. Elena. I called her name. Her Adam's apple moved. You know what? It's not a coincidence that we chose you. The abandoned textile factory behind her was leaking wind, and the sound of the hallway mixed with the sound of rain. You are the only one who can break this cycle. Loop. I squeezed the puzzle piece in my pocket. The S. Rama engraved on the back hurt my palm. You sank Fatima into the sea, and trapped Reza in his memories. Now you want me to be your new puppet. Evelyn smiled, her high heels rolling over broken glass. Scapegoat. She tilted her head. Sonia, do you think you're fighting evil? Her fingers stroked my wrist, and they were as cool as the metal trays in the morgue. No, you're fighting yourself. You suspended me, investigated the case, and dug up old scores, all to prove that I was not wrong back then. I wanted to pull my hand back, but she held it tighter and pulled out a piece of paper from her raincoat with her other hand. The edges of the paper were stained with old tea, and I glanced at the date, 3 months before the Rose Lane murder. Look. She let me go. The paper was limp in the rain, and I moved closer. The first line is my signature, and the second line is insufficient evidence, case closed. I recognized the woman in the 3rd row of photos, Marla, the first victim of the Rose Lane serial case. She was found in a cardboard box at the end of the alley, with her skirt torn to her waist. The file showed that she had called the police 3 months earlier, and reported that a man was following her. I was the one who responded to the call. You missed the dandruff between her fingernails. Evelyn's voice was like a snake's tongue. You said not enough to file a case, and 3 months later, the owner of the dandruff became a serial killer. My throat feels fishy. The memory of that day suddenly came flooding back. It was a rainy day, and Mara rushed into the police station soaking wet. The blood stains between her fingernails washed light red by the rain. I squatted down and handed her a tissue. She said, "He always looks at me," from behind the shrine. I looked up at the surveillance camera. There was only a faded wall behind the shrine. So the miscarriage of justice in the Rose Lane case was never a scapegoat. Evelyn leaned close to my ear. You were the one who closed the first door yourself. I stumbled back and bumped into the rusty iron door. The puzzle piece slipped out of his pocket and fell into a puddle. The 3 letters S. Rama were swollen by the rain. Elena bent down to pick it up, wiping away the water stains with her fingertips. We don't want a scapegoat. We want... That's enough, I interrupted her, grabbed the paper and ran. The rain boots splashed puddles everywhere, and Evelyn's laughter behind her was torn apart by the wind. You will come back, Sonia. The desk lamp in the rental house was flickering, and I slapped the paper on the table. The phone vibrated 10 times in my palm, and finally I dialed Amir's number. "Hello?" His voice was filled with electrical noise, as if he was in a car. "Mara called the police 3 months before the Rose Lane case." I stared at the signature on the paper. "My name is on the file." There was silence on the other end of the line. The rain hit the windowsill. I could hear him turning the steering wheel, and the click of him lighting a cigarette. He had quit smoking 8 years ago. "Sonia." His voice was as hoarse as sandpaper. "Maybe you shouldn't investigate further." I suddenly remembered that last week at the police station, when he was flipping through old case files. His finger paused for 3 seconds on a certain page. I remembered he said, "The evidence box from that year is in the warehouse," but he never gave me the key. It turned out that it was not negligence, but you already knew that. I squeezed the phone cord. "You've seen the file." He did not deny it. The police force is not trying to protect a certain person, but the system. He took a puff of cigarette. The misjudgment back then was from top to bottom. I hung up the phone. The light from the desk lamp fell on the paper. In the photo of Mara, her eyes were blurred by water stains, as if she was crying. At 4 in the morning, I dug out the old evidence box. The scene photos of the Rose Lane case were scattered all over the table, with a close-up of Mara's fingernail crevices on the top, magnified 20 times. A little light pink dandruff could be seen. I took out a magnifying glass and saw a crescent-shaped notch on the edge of the dandruff, which was exactly the same shape as the bite mark on the homeless man's body 20 years later. It turns out that the real murderer had left evidence when Mara first called the police. The next morning, dew formed on the railings of the iron bridge. I held the last piece of the puzzle in my hand and looked at the surging water under the bridge. The rain made the bridge pillars shine and reflected my face. The corners of my eyes were dark blue, like a bruise that had not been wiped off. "Throw it away." I didn't look back. Evelyn's voice floated from behind, mixed with the sound of the waves. "Throw it away, and you'll be completely clean." "But you know, Sonia." Her fingertips brushed across the back of my neck. "The cycle will not stop. The next Mara, the next scapegoat, the next detective with a name engraved on him." I let go of my hand. The puzzle piece fell into the water, making a small splash. As it sank, sunlight filtered through the water, refracting a streak of light off the debris. I squinted my eyes. There was a blurry shadow in the light, like an eye staring at me. "You will come back." Evelyn's voice was blown away by the wind. "Because you are already one of us." I turned and walked towards the alley, near the bridge. In the morning light, the old lady selling nasi lemak lifted the bamboo lid, and the fragrance mixed with the smell of seawater came over. The waves were still roaring behind me, and I heard the puzzle pieces spinning underwater. I heard the eye blink and said, "Take your time, Sonia." That's the end of tonight's story. Thank you for listening. Have a good sleep. Good night, dear wanderer.